Okay, let me see how I add Mike to this. Michael. Hear me. That's pretty funny. All right. Hey, Ian.
All
Hi,
right.
Mike. What's up?
How's it going? Can you see me? Everything look good?
I can't see you.
Oh, hang on
I
one sec.
can't see you. I don't know if it's on my end. Oh, there you are. There's your beautiful face.
I'm here.
Hello, my angel. Okay. So, how's it going?
It's going great. How about yourself?
It's going okay. I mean, we're in Newfoundland and there's a ton of cold weather and snow and just coming back from Florida, I'm kind of like, why did I even unpack my suitcase? Why did I even leave? What's it like over your way?
Yeah, I'm surprised. Honestly, it was 74, partly cloudy here, but pretty nice and warm for Pittsburgh, honestly.
Oh man, you can go up with your shorts on and that.
Yeah. I'm still dressed to the nines though, naturally.
It's actually funny though, because here in Newfoundland, as soon as it's like double digits, like even like 10, everyone's like out in shorts and t-shirts.
I believe at Pittsburgh, we always have like what we call our, typical yinzers is shorts and a t-shirt when it's like 45, 50 degrees out.
Yeah, man, you guys are living the dream over there. I still question why I'm living here. So, we've had a few conversations and a good few chats over lash science and the chemistry and everything like that. And like, I've loved all of our conversations. We've obviously had some good chats, and we kind of, for this IG live, we kind of summed it down into, I think there's 8 topics here that we're going to go over.
Yep.
Yeah, and you did a wonderful job at organizing the topics, I've got to say. So
Thank you. I appreciate it.
you are very welcome. So, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and like what it is that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, some may know me as Michael B. Chemist on Instagram, but my name is Michael Becker. I am the founder and owner of Michael Becker Consulting LLC, which specializes in cosmetic product development and cosmetic compliance in the US and Canada, and pretty much everything in between. I haven't announced it yet, but I can announce it here. I am a verified business partner of the American Lash Association, the ALA. If you haven't checked
Awesome.
them out, definitely check them out. They're fantastic. You definitely want to, explore all the benefits and offers that they have for us.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I was also a speaker at LashCon 2023, and I'll be speaking again at LashCon 2024, where it's the only conference really hosted around lashing, lash extensions, lash business. And yeah, it's something you definitely don't want to miss.
Oh, well, that's awesome. I love that. So that kind of got you into this industry, did it, with lashes? Or like were you like interested in eyelash extensions beforehand or?
Yeah, so little backstory. I have a bachelor's of science in chemistry and then a couple of associates in mathematics and sciences and engineering and sciences. And while I was going to school, a close friend of mine who worked for a lash brand at the time would always actually reach out to me and be like, hey, what's this ingredient? How's this
Right.
work? Why does this, why does this have to be in here? And a couple different questions. And my mother actually is an esthetician in her background too. So always kind of curious. Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Always been kind of curious about like cosmetics and cosmetology itself, especially as a scientist. You always pick up the bottle, you read the back of the ingredients, and
Yeah.
you're like, what is phenoxyethanol? What is ethyl hexylglycerin? What do all these things mean? What do they do? Are they safe? So really, I've always kind of had an interest in it. And, my friend working for a lash brand, I think really was kind of my ticket into actually getting into the cosmetic world.
Right. And like what I think is so cool too is like the fact that your mom was involved in aesthetics and that you had this interest in it. And I know you were telling me like, oh, she'd like try things, new things. You're like, ah,
Yeah.
this is interesting, mom. What's going on? I think that's so awesome because the aesthetics industry obviously needs a lot more education behind it and regulations. I feel like we have so much more to learn because it's not regulated on like an international kind of scale or even on a provincial scale for us here. So I think that that's awesome. And with LashCon, you're going to be speaking there this year, which is exciting again.
Yeah, yeah, I cannot wait. Honestly, I'm honored to be back and I can't wait to see all my friends again.
I'm so excited too, though, because I'm going to be speaking at Lash Fest. I don't know
Yeah,
if you are familiar with that, and I hope to see you there sometime.
yes.
Are you familiar with Lash Fest?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Lash
yeah,
Fest,
okay.
Lash Boss
So
Summit. I try to keep track of like all of them, honestly.
a few of them. We need like a little calendar for everybody. Um, but yeah, no, I'm so excited to do that. So I'm going to be a sponsor there and also going to be doing a presentation, which I'm excited about.
Yeah.
But for me, I am the owner of Elusive Beauty. I have been in the business for about almost a decade, which makes me sound so crazy old, but I've been here for that long. And I've pursued, diplomas and my undergrad studies, and now I'm doing my master's. And everything that I've done throughout my education has pertained to eyelash extensions, from toxicology to OHS to everything. So I'm just really excited to finally like focus in on this whole real lash science journey and evolve with that and help the industry grow and be somebody that people can depend on and ask questions and learn from. So that's kind of where I am. And I'm in Newfoundland right now. We talked about the weather and everything else, and here in the studio. And you're in?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So over in
Ooh.
the States, a little bit south of your
Right,
border.
right, right, right. So the time difference wasn't much. It was an hour and a half.
Yeah, not too bad.
Okay. All right, cool. So we know all about you. At the end of it, maybe you can just let us know where we can find you, and the things that you have coming up, like the LashCon, etc. Just let us know how to reach you, etc., in case anybody's interested in that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I guess what we'll dive into. So my background, I've also have a education studio, and I do services here in the province. And yours focused on chemistry, so it becomes really cool how we can discuss together. And with me having that chemistry and science background, we can kind of relate things for lash extensions a little bit better. So throughout this IG Live, we'll go through and I'll start with topic 2 right now because we already did the intros, and we'll kind of talk about how cyanoacrylate adhesives work. So, as we all know, lash artists, cyanoacrylate adhesives, that is the main ingredient in our adhesives because without it, things wouldn't be as strong. So there are different types. I can come up with 6 off the top of my head. There's
Yeah,
a
yeah. Honestly, there's even more than that, but I'd say the ones that latch artists are most familiar with, there's probably about five or six that you're going to
Yeah,
see. The
exactly.
octyl, butyl,
Ethyl,
ethoxy,
methyl.
methoxy,
Yeah.
ethyl, methyl, and I'd say, hey, Deidre, how's it going? But yeah, so I'd say there's probably about six that five or six that you're most commonly going to be exposed to as a lash artist that you're going to see in your adhesives.
Right. And most of them, if we look at it, is it mostly ethyl or methyl?
Yeah, I'd say 90% of what's out on the market is going to be ethyl. Um, I want to say there's one of them that's toxic. It might be the methyl one. I'd have to double check to be sure, but I know
Right.
one of them is not used because of its cytotoxicity and it's not biocompatible.
Right. So that one would be methyl, but that's not the polymethyl methacrylate.
No, that's different. So that is actually PMMA. So that's a whole different additive that we can kind of touch upon a little bit more here later in.
Yeah, no, we will. I just know that some people think that, they see certain ingredients, they're like, oh God, this is dangerous. But even with the
Yes.
abbreviations and things like that, the synonyms, it can be a little bit, um, a little bit questioning like whether or not it's safe or not safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll touch on
Absolutely.
that as well. When it comes to, so we know that cyanoacrylate adhesives, they do degrade over time. So depending on how they are formulated and what raw ingredients go into that to create that product, really depend on how things degrade as well. So when it comes to the degradation of them, what kinds of things affect that? Like in terms of oxygen exposure or moisture exposure, or how does that
Yeah,
exactly work?
yeah. Absolutely. So there's a couple different things that do affect lashes and the adhesive's durability, right? Chemical exposure probably being your primary case. And when I say chemical exposure, we're talking about everything from, what's in your atmosphere, environmental factors, to what type of cosmetics you're also using in that area or along the lash line too. So those can all play a factor. Heat is also another factor when it comes to retention. CAs are a little bit susceptible to heat. I know commonly a lot of people will always mention that, they had a fresh set of lashes and they were cooking, got too close to the oven. And so,
Sin.
yeah, so the plastic itself, too, the PBT, which the lashes are made of, is very susceptible to heat. But also, highly alkaline environments are another thing that can help kind of accelerate the degradation process. And then, contrary to popular belief, lash adhesives are considered oil resistant, or let me back that up. Cyanoacrylates are considered oil resistant and water
Not oil.
resistant.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that does not mean that they are waterproof or oil proof, right? So that's commonly why you see some of the other additives like PMMA and some other things added to them.
Yeah.
However, water and certain types of oils, which we'll touch a little bit more on as well,
Yeah.
do play a role in the degradation process of these cyanoacrylate adhesives. And there's two kind of main chemical reactions that occur to create this. They're kind of two big words here. So there's hydrolytic scission, which is basically when that polymer chain is cleaved in certain areas at certain bond points by water molecules or an abundance of water molecules. And again, high temps and alkaline pH environments can accelerate that degradation process. And then there's another one called ester hydrolysis, and that's similar to hydrolytic scission. It's actually kind of like a type of hydrolytic scission, except rather than the water molecules targeting kind of, I don't want to say random, but other bonds in the system, they're specifically attacking the ester linkages in the polymer chain.
Okay.
And
Mike, love
yeah,
where
I
you're
was going to
going.
say,
Let's back it
back it
up
up
a
for
bit
me.
because we're getting too excited right now and I don't want people to lose where we are. So if we look at the polymerization, can you just go back and just touch on exactly what that means? We talk about this, like how does the cyanoacrylate polymerize? Why do we use moisture? Can you just explain that process a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we say something polymerizes, right, lash artists tend to use the word cure instead of polymerize, but the chemical term is basically polymerize. And all that means, right, in a high level sense, your glue is basically going from a liquid tacky form into a hard plasticized state where it's kind of more of a brittle plastic that has, good strength, durability, and some flexibility to it, right? So on a molecular chemistry kind of level, these polymers, when things polymerize, you can think of your ethyl cyanoacrylate, the molecules in there, as single little beads, essentially.
A little more.
And yes, when they're exposed to water, these beads basically have a chemical reaction that occurs that changes the way their structure is in
Like
the structure of the molecule
creates like
itself.
that friendship bond, right? Like it creates that polymerization where those molecules be okay, y'all like get
Yeah,
excited.
yeah, exactly. So basically, on a chemistry level, nucleophilic attacks at the ester site and ester linkages are able to be formed to create the polymer chain. In simplistic terms, basically, those water molecules interact with those little beads of ethyl cyanoacrylate and cause them to be able to be linked together. And then they become linking at the site. And basically, what the backbone is of this, I keep saying the word
Yeah,
ester, that is
yeah.
basically what makes up the backbone of these
Right.
linkages,
In
right? So
terms of like
over time,
functional groups
yeah,
too, right?
yes, yeah,
So
exactly. So more of the functional groups are on the outside, but if you actually look at the polymer chain, you'll see dead in the center of that chain are those ester groups. So those ester groups really are responsible for a lot of the integrity of that bond and the performance of that bond. So when I'm saying ester hydrolysis, right, it's really attacking that bond at the heart and breaking them down. So as these little units kind of go from beads and then link up more and more together,
yeah.
they become longer and longer and longer and form these complex networks and chains of those, bonds between ethyl cyanoacrylate and then they no longer become, after a point, once they've all reacted, they become polycyanoacrylate, which is basically an inert cured form of that CA adhesive.
Right. No, that's super interesting. I think people are often really confused with that as well. In terms of the amount of moisture content that is brought into cyanoacrylate, how does that interact with it? I know there's like that happy medium. It's like Goldilocks, right? Like you can't have too much moisture, you can't have too little. So, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, the main process that drives these reactions is basically initiated by those water molecules in the atmosphere around us. So, those water molecules have a direct impact on how fast or how slow that adhesive is being able to cure to its substrate, right? So, the how do I want to explain this? The water molecules themselves, right? There is a thing, such thing as too much water, right? That phenomenon is better known as water inhibition, right? So those water molecules, if there's too much of them, they will actually inhibit the formation of those polymer bonds. And also, if there is an abundance of them, you can also experience what's called shock polymerization, which I know the industry is a little bit familiar with. And basically, you get a white blooming effect on the outside because that outer layer of the adhesive that's been applied cures so much more rapidly and dramatically than the rest of the adhesive what's underneath, that it might be actually hard and brittle on the outside, but underneath still might be a little bit more resinous and tacky.
Right,
So it doesn't dry
right.
uniformly, and that will cause retention issues in itself.
100%, because then I guess it would just start to degrade a little bit quicker. That bond is not so strong, it's not staying on, it's not curing from the inside out, and then you're having those issues with lashes. So that makes sense. So when it comes to this is something, Mike, you and I have not talked about, but I'm sure you're familiar with. But when it comes to using like a micro kind of like a nano mister, even the
Nanomisters, yep.
difference between nano mister and like a cure mister, anything like that, it has to do with the droplet size of the water molecule, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the nanomister, and I think a lot of companies may say they have a nanomister, but is it really a nanomister? So
Yeah, absolutely. That particle size is super important. Absolutely. I would totally agree with you there.
yeah, because if the particle size is too big for that H2O, then what's going to happen? It's going to have that polymerization effect where, or sorry, not polymerization effect, but the that white
Yeah, the
uh,
shock
shock
polymerization where it just
polymerization. Yes.
rapidly happens.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that you and I could touch upon too, because I'm interested in the way that the adhesives cure with different tools and equipment that you use. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's not, we have the tendency, because we've talked a few times now, and it's like, we can just go on. It's like 2 hours later. I'm like, hey, I was just
Hey.
talking to my friend. Okay, so we talked about the polymerization, and now we're going to lead into byproducts. So there's a lot of hype about formaldehyde, and you see so many people post on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that about make sure there's no formaldehyde in your adhesive, and people become very worried about it when my opinion is I don't think it's a huge concern. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that with us.
Yeah, and I'm happy you honestly brought this up, and this was a subject that we decided to talk about because even as much as I talk about it, it seems like the word doesn't really get out there too much. So I'm more than happy to always, provide this information and feedback. So when we're talking about the amount of formaldehyde generated in this process, there's tons of available data and resources out there from PubMed, ToxNet, and some other
Google
like
Scholar.
peer reviewed publication journals per se that they use to create these regulations that OSHA uses and takes into account. So when we're talking about the amount of formaldehyde that's generated, right, some is generated during the polymerization process as a byproduct, and some is also generated during the degradation process as a byproduct. Now, what I can tell you firsthand for certain is the amount of formaldehyde that you are being exposed to is well below permissible exposure limits set forth by OSHA, the EU, Canada, and other major countries, right? So that's first off the bat. And then the second thing I always like to remind people is your largest exposure from formaldehyde is not in your cosmetics. That is going to be from your food, actually. Many people don't really
Apples.
realize. Yes, exactly. And that's right where I was going with it. So, formaldehyde is commonly made as a byproduct from enzymatic reactions in fruits, vegetables, plants, and other, things that we eat. So, 2 kilos of apples, which is like 2.2 pounds, has approximately 20 milligrams of formaldehyde in it. Now, I know no one's really going to sit down and just house 2 pounds of apples, but just to put in perspective how much you're being exposed to in comparison to what's found in your adhesive when it's degrading, or I can't speak if it's a low quality adhesive and it hasn't been cleaned through the manufacturing process, but solely speaking on the chemical reaction level in that aspect and the degradation level, formaldehyde, I know it's a hot button and people hear that and
Yeah.
they're like, oh no, but you are exposed to it so much more in your dietary habits than you are from your cosmetics. And it's well below the permissible exposure limits set forth by many regulatory bodies. It is not an issue. Something that regulatory bodies, that I've been told at least by others, um, is they're actually more concerned with acetone. Acetone and the ppms and the exposure of acetone, what a lot of lash artists use to soak their tools in,
Yeah.
is actually more of a concern for OSHA and regulatory bodies from it,
Okay.
and actually a little bit more toxic. So,
Okay, let's go back on that one because I haven't touched on that with you. But with in terms of formaldehyde, I think that a lot of people who want to be educated on lashes and want to learn like how to apply lashes safely and use safe products, they may find studies and not looking at those studies properly. They're looking at different exposure rates, and the duration of exposure. Whereas a lot of those studies are from factories. So somebody exposed to a formaldehyde concentration is far more exceeding what we as lash artists would actually, inhale or, it's
yeah.
completely different. So I think that that's why a lot of misinformation gets out there on toxicology studies. But I
Hmm.
also understand why lash artists, like, they see a study and they're like, okay, I need to protect myself. I don't want to have any issues if I'm pregnant or anything like that. But I
Yeah.
also feel like a lot of it doesn't relate to the lash industry. It relates to big manufacturing companies.
Yeah, and to even elaborate further on that, if you read some of these studies when it comes to like inhalation exposure, right? If they'll do these exposure tests on mice and rats because they're good, biological indicators of what's going to happen in humans. But the thing that, if you read the fine lines, like you were mentioning, right, they'll have, a rat inhale 1 to 2 kilograms of that
Yeah.
powder in an aerosol
Like,
over 8 hours. And no
no
one
one's doing
is,
that. No one's
yeah,
doing
they're
that.
they're really doing it to test, the maximum threshold,
Yeah.
your LD50s and
Yep.
whatnot, and then your minimal thresholds
Correct.
to determine what's safe.
And then that would, based on that information that we have from those scientific studies, scientists would take that information and then relate it to the exposure limits of what a lash artist would be exposed to. And that would not be anything comparable. It would just be, completely a moot point in that sense.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, cool. So formaldehyde. Anybody have any questions on formaldehyde? And also, actually, I have kind of a question. So when
Yeah.
formaldehyde starts to degrade, so you have your lash adhesive. I don't know if I have one here, but you have your lash adhesive. You open it up. Immediately, that adhesive is exposed to moisture content and oxygen. So what's happening then is that is starting to form what in the sense? Is it formaldehyde gas that's released or formaldehyde in the liquid form?
Okay, so I
We
can't.
get so excited.
No, yeah, you're good. So to back it up too, because some people might not know this, right? To produce this CA adhesive, it is produced with ethyl cyanoacetate in formaldehyde gas that is condensed, and then the monomers that I was talking about, your little beads are left over, but they're still kind of linked together. So they will basically constantly reheat this kiln until those polymers essentially become their individual beads known as monomers.
Would it
If
be safe to say, Mike, at this point, that when we're talking about monomers, it's like individual little people. These monomers are just individuals, and then all of a sudden they come in, they have a group of friends, and they're polymers, right? So
Yeah,
it makes that connection so
and they're
strong.
holding hands.
Yeah, okay, just
Yes.
making sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, chains of repeating units, right? So it's just ethyl, or it's just, cyanoacrylate in a giant chain instead of individual pieces of that ethyl cyanoacrylate, right? So we change the name when it joins together, and I know that kind of throws people off, but yeah, that's a good way of putting it, basically.
Okay.
Um, but as I was saying, so they will continuously do this process and heat those polymers up until they are their individual units. If anybody lives Pittsburgh, we have a Shell plant, basically Shell petroleum gasoline. They create polymers and do a lot of ethylene oxide production there and other things. Those factories are known as what's called cracker plants. Like you would think like Nabisco crackers like you eat, but
Yeah.
it's actually referring to the process I'm describing, which is known as the cracking of polymers. So your CA adhesives, right? The more that they're heated and cracked in a sense, the higher the purity is. So going back to what we were talking about with the formaldehyde in the bottle, right? Depending on how pure your adhesive is and the level of refinement, it is potentially possible, because of the manufacturing process and formaldehyde condensed gas being involved, that your adhesive could have that as a potential contaminant if not refined enough. So that's one possible area of where, that built up formaldehyde gas that people talk about, like, oh, it was shipped during transport, all this gas has been building up in there. That's one possible reaction. And then in the instance that you're speaking of, right, when we first get our adhesives,
Can
as
I
you
can I
mentioned,
stop you for 1 second, Mike?
yeah.
Just wondering, backing up to what you just said, I just don't want to lose the train of thought. So when you're referring to the cracking, are you referring to the atoms themselves or the molecules themselves?
So the molecules, they're not individual atoms, but individual units of polymer chains. What makes up your polymer chain? Those single repeating
Yep.
units, they're called monomers. So
Okay.
when the polymers are being cracked, right, they're not just instantly, just single units. Some bits of single units might exist, but they're still actually in polymer chains when they're made, because naturally they want to polymerize in the process,
Right.
and it's a condensation reaction. So water is always produced as a byproduct of condensation reactions, which initiates some of that polymerization in the kiln. But so when you're cracking them, you're basically taking those leftover chains where, maybe it's 4 units here, maybe it's 7 units here. Those are known as oligomers, for, proper nomenclature terminology.
Anyone
Um,
taking notes here?
Yes, but those oligomers, right, they still need refined down, because if you were to open that and get those, as you mentioned, when you first expose that adhesive to moisture and atmosphere, when you open it, that moisture gets in there. It's so hard for moisture resistant packaging to be 100% moisture resistant. It's physically near
Yeah.
impossible, to be honest. So those molecules in there, right? Some of those individual monomer units, they begin to polymerize naturally and form dimers, right? So two of the monomers connected together, or three or four or five, known as oligomers. And because that polymerization reaction is still occurring, right? As I mentioned, formaldehyde is produced as a byproduct in tiny, tiny bits,
Yep.
not a
And we're
health concern.
still discussing, just going back, we're still discussing in the adhesive itself. When you open up the adhesive, this is what's happening, right? And this,
Yes,
I think this is part of the reason why, like you and I can discuss why it's important to shake your adhesive up too, because of the sediments and how things are separated.
yes. Thank you for the slides and visuals at LashCon. I'm happy to share those with anybody. Just, don't hesitate to
Aw,
slide in my DMs and
I,
reach out. Thank you so much for pointing that out. I appreciate you.
we're excited for LashCon too. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Come to Lash
Yeah. So,
Fest.
yes. But yeah, so as we mentioned, right, some formaldehyde is going to be generated out of there. Now, to what extent, and is it going to cause like, oh no, I know a lot of people like to burp their bottles per se. I'm okay with that, but just keep in mind, if you're burping it, you want to do it right, because any air that goes back in there is kind of going to be
Burp
self-defeating the purpose of
close.
burping your adhesive.
Okay, so are you saying to take the adhesive, burp it, and then close it? So that
Yeah, but
would have like that concave effect on the adhesive, which obviously wouldn't cause any issues. It's actually more beneficial than anything. So I think, yeah, a lot of people will burp the adhesive, let it go, let the new clean air back in, and then put the cover over it. But you want to burp it, put the cover over top of it, and make sure everything's sealed.
yes.
Just a different note here with silica. I know that that draws in the moisture. So is that something that you would recommend in terms of storing your adhesive, having silica in there?
Yeah, and I'm actually happy you brought this up. So something that I've come across a lot with lash artists, a lot of people say that they put it in their fridge. I do not recommend putting your adhesive in your fridge. And part of the reason why is because of the effect of what's known as adsorption, right?
Hmm.
So naturally, we kind of talked about condensation. So when you're taking that adhesive that's going to be colder than the atmosphere now, you're bringing it out to. I know some people kind of let it warm up and acclimate a little bit,
Yep.
but all of the water that's available in the atmosphere because of that pressure differential, temperature differential, it's actually going to attract
I
moisture to that
was just
adhesive
thinking
more
about
than
that.
not.
Yeah.
So you're going to get the effect of adsorption in that sense. And if, you can kind of think of it when you open your fridge, if you ever notice right along where it's sealed, there's typically like condensation of some
Yeah.
sort to some degree. That's because of that temperature difference right there at your seal. So
So
you're seeing
is
those
it
water
is it
droplets
what you're
form.
saying right now for the lash artist here? Is it that so if we store our adhesive in a refrigerator, obviously that's colder, what's going to happen? That condensation is going to come in, which means there's more moisture content in that bottle. That moisture content is not going to have the same properties as what it originally had. So if there's more moisture content, how would that play a role in retention? Because some people who do store their adhesives in the fridge may find, hey, my clients are losing their lashes much quicker than they should.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing I like to point out too about storing things in the fridge, right? I always say if possible and it works for you, I'd always at least recommend maybe doing a wine fridge instead because typically wine fridges have controlled RH environments that you can kind of manipulate them so that when your manufacturer says, hey, store in these conditions at this humidity, and don't expose to direct light, you can kind of follow all three of those steps with proper storage conditions. And kind of to your point, what you're saying, right? There's more moisture, it's more abundant. And because it's not like humidity controlled environment,
Mm.
again, moisture is extremely hard to keep out of packaging. So if you really, if you're exposing it to more moisture than not, you're potentially encouraging some of those reactions we just spoke of to happen inside of the bottle.
Yep.
Um,
So what do I do when the instructions are to store it in the
Store it in the
refrigerator?
fridge, but
But
store it.
store it. So
Yeah.
I get what she's saying here. So a lot of times you'll get instructions from manufacturers, and it's saying like, okay, if you're ordering a large supply, what do you do? Because obviously, if you have them out for 3 months, it's not going to be as effective. So a lot of manufacturers encourage you to store it in the fridge for 6 months. And when you store it in the fridge for 6 months, when you take it out to resell it, you would obviously want to go through that vibration process to make sure that
Yeah,
everything was settled properly.
put it all
Yeah.
mixed.
So can you, because for me as well, I've always found that, and I've never had issues with it, but if I order in bulk products, I will store them in the fridge. And then by the time I go to resell them, I make sure they're at room temperature and I make sure that they're mixed up properly. And I've never had any issues with that. So
Now,
can you like,
Yes. So if you are storing them in the fridge for resale, okay, but that's fine because that initial crack and seal of that packaging, I can't speak for every
oh,
manufacturer, but I would imagine because of the susceptibility that polymerization, like due to moisture being everywhere, right? I would imagine they would have some sort of induction sealing process under inert conditions such as like nitrogen or argon to prevent any moisture from getting in there initially in the first place, and that pressurized gas that's in there, whatever they blew over top of it to induction seal it, it has a pressure differential that's actually going to push the opposite pressure out, right? So think of positive pressure going out and then that pressure trying to go in. Those molecules
yeah.
can't pass because of that pressure differential. So if it's freshly sealed and cracked and it's been, induction sealed by the manufacturer, which I'd imagine most CAs are, um, because of their susceptibility to moisture and polymerization and spoilage in that manner, um, I would say you're okay. But if it's a
Right.
lash adhesive that you're cracking
Opening,
and then like, all right, I'm
it's
done with my
exposed.
sets for
Yeah,
the day, back in the
absolutely
fridge.
not.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. That's more
I
so.
would
Thank
go
you
with
for
that.
clarifying that too.
Yeah, yeah. So what we're saying now is that like if you have an order, a larger order of adhesives, a big sale on, and you put that in your fridge, that's fine. It's not open, it's untouched, it's sealed properly as long as the manufacturer has done that. And then you go and take those adhesives out 2 months later. you're going to want to make sure they're at room temperature like normal, and that you're going to want to make sure that they are vibrated, or you go through a shaker with it of some sort so that the particles are settled properly and evenly throughout. What? Oh, evenly
Yes, yeah.
throughout. So I think that that makes a huge difference. But to take an adhesive that you've opened up, that's been exposed to the air, has moisture content in it, and put that in the fridge is not something I would ever recommend to anybody.
Yes, yeah, and I like your idea too, silicas, right? Anything that has like a desiccant type effect that's going to draw in the abundance of moisture to itself
Yeah.
rather to, where it's stored. I like that. And then I know some people have actually come up with like, kind of remind me of like pie plates, but for your adhesive to block out like light exposure too.
Yeah,
So
yeah, like the
that's
little
cool. I
like
like those
canisters.
too. Yeah,
The little
yeah.
canisters. Yeah, yeah. We have
I'm
one
a
of those
fan
every
of
once in a
those
while.
too.
Yeah, I think they're really great. I wonder like how much more beneficial they are. Like if you look at an adhesive sat down in an environment like this without being enclosed. Anyways, I think we're gone off. We've got topic two. We're not even done yet here, Mike. We've got to stay on track.
I know, I know. We'll get there.
Okay, okay. So we talked about formaldehyde, and we talked about the alkyl cyanoacrylates, different cyanoacrylates, the cleavage of polymer chain, water molecules attack bonds and chains and weaken the polymer network, strength to compromise it. So when it comes to high temperatures and alkaline pH and things like that, do you want to touch on that with the environment, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So, CA adhesives and the way that like high pH and alkaline environments affects them is very similar to that of urethanes and polyurethanes. So, if anybody's ever stained their deck before, you can actually kind of think of it like that, right? So, if you're out there staining your deck or applying your adhesives, if it's too cold, that polymerization process,
Yeah.
right? Typically, colder environments are a little bit drier too, on top of that. So, you're already looking at less. I don't want to say less than normal because depending on where you live, that just might be your normal. But you already have less available water content and moisture available in the air to drive that reaction. So
Right. So
what
in
happens
terms of
is,
surface tension, that's of the surface tension of those, you would say that they are better or not in warmer, colder environments? Because I would say in cold environments that all of those little paints are just like crawling up and to be like little tiny balls.
yeah, I'd say it's a two-way street, right? So too hot and too alkaline, or too hot and too acidic is going to be bad, and then too cold and too alkaline is also not going to be just as well, right?
Yeah.
So on either side of the extreme spectrum, basically what's going to happen is you're going to either have bonds that rapidly form, and because they're rapidly forming, from high temperatures in a high pH environment, those bonds are going to be shorter, less flexible, and more brittle, right? So that's going to lead to retention issues and less durability when it comes to mechanical agitation, just something as such as someone rubbing their eyes. When you're talking about more acidic and colder environments, right, that's going to have an inhibiting effect on the adhesive, where too acidic of an environment isn't going to allow for that polymerization process to happen as easily as it should, even with the abundance of water available. And then on top of that, those cold environments, that polymerization process is going to happen a lot slower. So your bonds might be a little bit longer than if it was extreme heat and highly alkaline. However, some of those bonds might not ever even form or take longer than usual to form. And that's something lash artists want to avoid, especially when it comes to things like stickies, right? You want that
Right.
placement. Once you set it, you just want it to stay right there. Don't move.
Yep.
You're good.
Yep. No, that's right. And I think like stickies are a huge thing for us. So, like working with the environment that we have, and like the humidity is such a huge factor in that too. We'll get into that more, but I just think that it's important to look at the way the humidity is and the way the adhesive operates. And I don't think everyone quite looks at the instructions on the adhesives themselves. It's like, oh, it's 40 to 50% humidity, or it's 20 to 70% humidity. There's so many different ranges for that. So I think that that's a good point as well. In terms of ester hydrolysis, so can you elaborate on that topic?
Yeah, it's similar to hydrolytic scission, and it's really a type of hydrolytic scission, but basically water molecules and other molecules, not just specifically water, are capable of having a similar degradation process. But when hydrolysis is involved, it specifically calls out water molecules. That's really what
That's what
hydrolysis is bringing.
hydrolysis is. Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah, just so everybody knows, because they're like, hydrolysis, he keeps saying this. What does it mean? Just think it
Yeah.
means degradation by water. I'm doing something with water.
And if anybody wants clarification at all, just let us know because I
Yeah.
know it does become a lot of words that not everybody is used to. But I think from what we've talked about so far, we've discussed, monomers and how they are, and then polymers and those chains, and having friends as such that connect with you to create these stronger bonds. I think that's a good analogy of it. And just talking about hydrolysis, how water interacts with different chemicals. And is there anything else that you want to say on what we just covered?
No, I'd say, those are really kind of high level, more of your degradation pathways, how the adhesive works. And as Dee said, if you guys need any sort of clarification from us, or you just honestly are curious and want to learn more, please do not hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah.
Slide in our DMs, schedule some time with us.
Yeah.
Whatever you need, we're here to help you and answer. So,
Absolutely. It's a thing. So we're going to move on after ester hydrolysis. We have a little agenda here. So we've been a little bit prepared, which is great. Moving on up in this field.
yes.
So we have degradation. So when we talk about degradation as lash artists, we often use that term degradation for the adhesives not staying on or poor retention issues. Degradation is a little bit different. So I know you have roads wrote down here, and I think that's a great way to relate it. So over time, you have this beautiful road put together. I'm going to use yours.
Yeah.
And then there's certain things that interact with it, whether it's the pressure from the water system, whether it's a chemical that comes in, or some mechanical application that interfere with how that road is. And by road, I mean the actual bond to the synthetic and natural lash. So when that happens, you end up getting pockets in the cyanoacrylate adhesive. So within those pockets, the synthetic lash can become I love my little hand movements. The synthetic lashes can become a little bit more susceptible to poor retention issues because of that. So there are numerous things that we can do, and we discussed the benefits of having a serum and using sealant and things like that. But degradation is so different from other things that we often think lash retention issues are from. Degradation is over a period of time where slowly things start to happen. It's not like when you go and get your lashes done and all of a sudden your lashes slip off, right? That's not degradation. That's an issue with the mechanical or the chemical application on our end, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about degradation there, Mike?
No, I like that. I think you hit the nail on the head. And like when your lashes naturally degrade, as you mentioned, right? They're not just going to fall and slip off. The CA is a very strong, durable bond, and there's a reason that they chose to work with this other than yes, perfect.
Acrylic
Acrylate
pressure.
fractures. Exactly. And that's why some products that do exist, right, on the market, such as sealants, right? You could think of it when you see someone patching a pothole on a road, your adhesive is no different, right? And your sealants basically work to kind of patch those potholes to make sure that you get the most longevity out of your lashes.
Right. So the sealants themselves. So I think you and I have already discussed this a little bit in terms of sealants. So after normally the process that I use is like wash the lashes, warm water, use a hydrating primer, put the cyanoacrylate on with the natural lash and the synthetic lash. Make sure that mechanical application is perfect, and then I'll go through and use a sealant. That sealant itself, or I guess that is supposed to ensure that the adhesive cures quicker and that it's a stronger bond. When it comes to serums and things like that, that's a little bit different, right? The
Yeah.
serums, so would you say the serum, yes, it conditions the lashes, makes it nice and healthy. So would you separate an after sealant versus a serum, or would you say that a serum would be significant or sufficient enough, sorry, for protecting those those bumps in the roads? Or do you think you still need a serum or a sealant to add to that?
Yeah, so I would say your sealant's more going to be your protectant. Your serums are going to be what conditions the lashes and has some of those like nourishing components. A lot of sealants that I've seen right now. There's a couple brands at Sephora, honestly, that are actually like fairly on the cheaper side, which I've heard great things about. But a lot of the serums that you're looking for, right? If you're looking for nourishing or conditioning type things, you want to look for peptides, botanicals, sodium hyaluronate, things that are really going to be
Sodium
like bountiful and give
hyaluronate.
back to your lashes, especially because you're putting them through this chemical process that can be somewhat wearing over time. So I always think it's important to condition, and even if you don't have lashes or wear lash extensions, there's still benefits to actually using lash serums as well.
Oh,
So they're great. And then sealants, though, as we mentioned, right? Just think of them as an extra layer of protection that you can add to your adhesive. And it's something that some vendors I've started to see are retailing sealants, but it's something I would recommend that you use over the course of every 3 to 5 days. A lot of these sealants use polymers or film forming agent polymers that are commonly found in mascaras that people are already wearing and exposing themselves to. But you just want to make sure that you're not adding too much residue or too much mechanical stress to that, right? You don't want to really
right.
gunk it on and you don't reapply mascara constantly throughout the day because by the
Yeah.
end it'd just be very gushy and clumpy and
No,
all
I
that
think
stuff. So,
it's like the point of keeping things the way that it is, right? Trying to, because obviously when you have eyelash extensions on or you go for a lash lift and tint, that changes the way that your lashes and the follicles like that function. So
yeah,
I think it's like more maintaining that equilibrium
yeah,
there. But just going back to what we talked about with sealants and things like that, I think that when we look at that road, the sealant is what it's basically doing is like you get those potholes in the road and then you
hmm
need to cover them up. So having a sealant that we discussed about having proteins in it, that also really benefits because those are larger polymers and they can actually fill in the gaps and prevent that degradation that we talk about. Whereas degradation of lashes, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like a
no,
2, 3 day thing, it's over time. And that's why it's important for lash clients to have aftercare products. So, so in terms of preventative actions, I think we'll touch a little bit more on shampoo as we go on. And we talked
hmm
about sealant and serum. Does anybody have any questions about sealant or serum, or is there anything you want to clarify? Any ingredients? Feel free to chat. Okay, I'll move on. So what are the additives commonly found in cyanoacrylate lash adhesives and are they safe? So the first one, this is so exciting. I love this one. Because, I know being on Instagram and social media, like we see so many things where
lots of
people are saying, you
fear.
can't do this. Lots of fear, right? Everyone's like, oh God, I can't use this. And then next thing you know, you're being told off for having a certain ingredient in your adhesive. And it's like, that's fine. It's,
Yeah, yeah,
it's standards, it's the regulations. But I think that, so one of the ones that I have certainly had encounters with was the polymethyl methacrylate, the PMMA. So, from my understanding, PMMA is formulated into cyanoacrylate adhesives so that it can have a more durable ability. So it creates like almost like that like that plexiglass shatter proof ability, and it also aids in the longevity of your lashes because they are not that they're weak, but they're much stronger because of it. Can you tell me like your experience with PMMA?
yes. Real quick, just want to answer two questions. Balash by Michelle, yes, we will be going over UV adhesives today. And then Edie Zahala, sorry if I'm like crushing these names terribly, I apologize. While rare, it's important for clients to know how to proceed if they have any issues post application. Can I swim or shower with lash extensions? So I would say when it comes to that, kind of what we were talking about before when it comes to inhibition and hydrolytic excision, part of the reason you're feeling that warming effect is because that water still does have a polymerizing effect on
So
adhesives, especially the
cold
cyanoacrylate
or
adhesive.
warm? cold or warm though? Because that does play like the exothermic effect. I feel like that temperature really does play a role in that.
Yes, but still, cold water will still encourage that behavior because it's an abundance of it. Basically, you're overwhelming that environment with that water. And then something else that I do want to point out too is how you guys commonly are instructed not to, overexpose your lashes to water for 24 to 48 hours. That's because even though the polymer pretty much has, dried for a good bit of time, I'd say on we always say macro and micro level. On the macro level, that polymer, you see it is hard, cured, pretty brittle at that point. But on a molecular level, if you go on a microscopic level, that polymerization process and that polymer network is actually still forming over the next course of the 24 to 48 hours. And part of that warming effect that you're feeling is the acceleration because of the exposure to water molecules. You're actually feeling that reaction kind of accelerate, and that heat generation you're getting exothermic, as Dee mentioned, is basically being encouraged because naturally this product produces heat as a reaction when that CA adhesive cures.
Okay. Let me touch on this theory. So when sealants, because this is only a new thing, where lash sealants became available, and what was it that they offered lash artists? And it came down to the fact that when you have cyanoacrylate adhesive, it's curing from the environment outside. So you have this little tiny bubble here sitting on the lash. And what's happening when you use a sealant is those molecules are much smaller than what the adhesive is. So essentially, it's curing the adhesive from the inside out. What are your thoughts on that theory?
I'd say because of the way that they spread, right? You're still getting exposure from both sides. You're still getting that water basically penetrating from the atmosphere and also from the substrate itself. If you ever actually look at how things are applied on a like microscopic level, like if you ever look at an ECM basically of mascara and how it looks once applied and then once rinsed off, you'd actually be surprised that not everything's covered uniformly and in its entirety, right? So there's actually blotches that kind of make up the visual appeal. If you look down on a microscopic level, it's not actually completely encased in, let's say, mascara, because that's what I'm talking about
Right.
for this instant. So, in my understanding with how sealants work, you would see a reduced or a diminished effect from that because it does have a protecting film over certain spots and blotches, but you would still probably experience it to some degree, just probably not as much from using a sealant.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So, should we be cleaning our clients' lashes after the service? I have seen some do this. Okay. So, my opinion first.
Yeah, yeah, go
And I
ahead.
know we've talked about this. So, normally, I would not suggest cleaning them afterwards unless, I guess, if they were prone to having allergic reactions or they had really sensitive skin, if they had contact dermatitis or something like that. But we talked about another alternative, which I also I feel would be really beneficial, the isotonic solution, which you mentioned, just to neutralize everything and make sure that there are no issues with allergies. But I think that using the shampoo, which would be slightly higher acidic than the natural lashes, I don't feel that that's the best thing to do after an application because then you have that not like not alkaline but slightly more pH than what the lashes are, and then what's going to happen to that cyanoacrylate. So that kind of bothers me a little bit, but I think that the isotonic solution that you suggested would be fantastic for that to alleviate any irritation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Deidre also said once a bonder is applied, though. So I'd say if you're using a super bonder, something to help kind of accelerate that polymerization process, using a super bonder or I know boosters too, they're kind of used interchangeably. Hello,
Hey,
hello. But I'd
Siri,
say
you're
using
so
a
social.
booster,
Look at you.
yeah, absolutely. But using a
Hello.
booster or a bonder, I'd say would probably mitigate some of those effects that you would see, such as water inhibition and a couple of the other things we discussed. So the one thing I'd say is, take it one step at a time, right? If you're curious about doing that, see if you have a client who's willing to test that process. But when you're testing that process, only change that variable, right? Because if you change anything else, it's going to be harder to identify, like, oh, hey, this does not work at all, or hey, I didn't see any effects. So making sure when you're trying new things and adding new techniques to your
Yeah.
process, you're only modifying one step to kind of mitigate all your variables to
Yeah.
give you better insight is super important.
That is, that's a really, really good point because I think that sometimes we can get a little bit crazy and have like all these ideas of maybe it's this, maybe it's that, but to try to just focus in on that one variable and stay with that, I think that's a great, great point. Maggie, I will give you another spray tan soon, okay? We'll talk about spray tan chemistry soon enough, okay, girl?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that we have clarified that on degradation, preventative actions.
Yep.
What are
PMMA,
some
I think,
added
is where we were at.
PMMA? And then we're going over to here. Another fun one is the hydroquinone.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So, just real quick, something I wanted to add. So, PMMA, as Dee mentioned, right? It's commonly used
Yep.
to increase flexibility in a couple different things. You're
Yep.
good, Maggie. Don't even sweat it. No
Oh,
worries. But PMMA
Maggie,
is
Maggie, okay? Oh
commonly
my bad.
yeah, it's used as a plasticizer to improve the flexibility and chemical resistance of the bond. I know a lot of people are concerned about this,
Yeah.
but it's actually commonly used in dental and medical implants because of its sterility and durability, and it's non-toxic. So this is a safe ingredient. That's kind of just all I wanted to touch on with that PMMA.
Yep. 100%. And I think there's probably more ingredients. I know that carbon black, I haven't heard much hype about that being toxic or anything like that, but I do know that anybody that has an irritation or sensitivity to like mascara or eyeliner, I mean, most makeups contain carbon black. So if I kind of ask my clients that ahead of time, like, do you have any irritations or
Yeah.
sensitivities to mascara or eyeliner or eyeshadow? And if they do, then I say, okay, well, this might be an issue. And if that's an issue, then we go with a sensitive adhesive. And I say sensitive because there's really no actual definition for sensitive adhesive. What's this? Do you see the balloon?
Yeah, I did see those. I was a little confused, but that works.
It's like here.
Um, but yes, so hydroquinone, basically, it's used as a stabilizer. It's just in there to prevent premature polymerization of the CA and ensure your shelf life so your product doesn't spoil as soon as you open it. You're not coming back and you're like, wow, this is a rock. It's
So
like cured.
when you say stabilizer, just confirming this with everyone, so that means that there's different particles in there, different ingredients that if there's no stabilizer within that adhesive, it's just going to completely separate like in a centrifuge and it's not going to stay together. And then you're going to be like, why are my clients' lashes not staying on? So there's a purpose to it.
Yeah, and even in this case, so hydroquinone actually in this instance doesn't function as a stabilizer by keeping things in suspension together necessarily. It kind of works more so as a capping agent and gets in the way of those water molecules. It's basically standing in front of those CA monomers and it's like, nope, you can't touch them. Not allowed to go
Right.
here. Not happening. So they're kind of like the bodyguards of those guys and just making sure that that polymerization process doesn't just happen like that.
So how does okay, so that's looking at it from the bottle standpoint. What about when you take that adhesive with hydroquinone and you put it on the lash? So is that going to cure slower or
Depends on the concentration of hydroquinone in there. So I've seen as low as 0.3% up to 1% in use, I want to say. But that being said, like it, that would kind of already be communicated in your dry time, right? In your manufacturer instructions.
yeah.
They have that understanding of it because they've run the specs to get that information. So, yes, hydroquinone like will have an effect, but they've already accounted for that when manufacturing it to make sure that it's still going to cure in a
And
reasonable amount of time and you're not like, "Oh my god, this just doesn't work because this has this," or "Wow, this is taking a while."
right. So I think if you look at the dry time on it or cure time of it, and then you determine if you need to use a primer of some sort to help accelerate that ahead of time, then that might work.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so in terms of accelerators and things like that, when we look at acids and bases, if we were to put an acid or acidic primer down on the lashes, how would that interact with cyanoacrylate versus a basic primer?
Depending on how acidic the primer is itself, right? As we mentioned, acids, they have an inhibiting effect on that polymerization process. Now, keep in mind, your skin, your follicles, your like
Are
hair,
more
everything
acidic. Yeah.
is like 5.5 on average to
Yeah.
6.2. Depends on you are, depends on ethnicity, where you live, couple other different factors, but it's fairly acidic itself. And think about how well the adhesive already works without primers and boosters and all those things,
Right.
right? So if you're having something that's acidic, but let's say it's, 5.5 to 6.5, it's only slightly acidic, I'd say yes, if you want to get technical and look on a microscopic level,
We're going
it's going
into
to have,
nano.
yeah, it's going to have a significant effect. But if you're looking at big picture, like macroscopic, like what am I looking at? What am I physically seeing if I'm to time it? I'd say you wouldn't see too much of a significant difference when it comes to that.
Okay. All right, cool. So we have a question. My question about carbon black, how can someone become allergic to that? Isn't it just activated charcoal? So,
No, so carbon black is a pigment agent, but it's actually not as the particle size is different to that of activated charcoal, where it's not as large in particulate size, but it's still bigger than particulate size of soot, right? If you're in a fire, you see all that soot at the bottom, that's carbon still. The main thing that why people, in my opinion, and what I've experienced, become I don't want to say allergic, but have a reaction
sensitive,
to it.
right? Sensitivity.
Yes, is because of it's a three-letter acronym that everybody's going to start hearing a lot more probably in the future, especially. It's called because of PAHs, which are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Basically, carbon black is a product of combustion, right? In combustion, when we combust something, it has the potential to produce all sorts of carcinogen and other carbon-based compounds.
Yeah.
So there is strict guidelines for carbon black in the US, Canada, EU, for PHA content and making sure that that carbon black that's been sourced has a suitable pH content before being used in that purpose, right? The one thing I've noticed is carbon black, because it's a process of combustion, there's a lot of cheap carbon black out there that might not necessarily be as
Have
clean as
purity. Yeah.
advertised. So something you can always do if you're experiencing that, or say, you have an adhesive that you've used, you can always kind of reach out to your manufacturer and ask if they source the ingredient from somewhere else, or kind of ask for more information on that specific ingredient. And we'll go more into the purity of adhesives and ingredients in a little bit here too.
Yeah, and like also just on that question too, from my standpoint, I think that just the environmental conditions that we're exposed to and the products that we use on our face and things like that create some issues with our skin barrier. So in terms of different ingredients like carbon black that normally 10 years ago would not have been an issue, at this point in time, our skin, because of that barrier being somewhat broken down, we're more sensitive to things that we
Hmm.
normally wouldn't be. And like if you are somebody with, you have an immune compromised system, or you have different factors that could contribute to that, that would obviously have that happen as well to you, or could contribute to that a little bit more. So I think that's a good point to also add. But
Yeah.
generally, when it comes to carbon black itself, so if somebody has an allergy, oftentimes I find they think they have an allergy, but it could have been that the lash extensions were applied wrong. It had a blocked follicle. They irritated the skin. The adhesive was poor quality. There's so many factors that contribute to that. But if they truly feel they have an allergy to it, and then you use a cyan or not cyanamide, we're on that next or eventually. If we use a like Invisibond adhesive, something that's clear that doesn't have that black pigment, because that's all it is doing is giving it that color, right? And it makes
Yes.
it easier for lash artists to be able to figure out how much adhesive we're using, because without it, we're like, I think this is the right amount. Um, but I think there's a little bit of confusion around that. Like I'm certainly interested to figure that out too. But yeah,
Yeah, no, I love that take on it too, because the one thing I'd like people to keep in mind, right? I, as a scientist, there's never really like a good black and white answer you're ever gonna get, right? And it's always going to be like a complex issue, right? It could be, as Dee mentioned, your skin barrier. How's that functioning? What is your diet even could have some effect?
Yeah.
What's the ingredient quality like? So it's never just really like as simple as like, oh yeah, it's this. It's usually like a myriad of a couple different things, all kind of culminating together, and
Yeah.
that's the effect you're seeing.
Yeah.
The
The
only other thing I want to add,
synergistic effect.
yeah, and the only other thing I want to add too is there's a lot of confusion out there between allergic reactions and sensitivities, and I think Dee, you were kind of talking about that too. Is when you think of an allergic reaction, that's
Yeah.
the induction of anaphylaxis. Your body's sending, and you could probably actually speak to this a little bit better than me with your OHS background, right?
Mhm.
An anaphylaxis response is much different than that of like a sensitivity response where you're having inflammation that's localized.
Yeah, it's totally different. So sensitivity is something that usually develops. It's something, so you have, if we look at the hierarchy of how this goes, we have irritation, then we have sensitivity, and then we have allergic reactions. So an irritation from a lash procedure would be like if you have your client's iPads, the bottom of them down, and it's rubbing against their eye, that might cause like a chemical pink eye. So an irritation means once you remove that object, it starts to go away. A sensitivity may develop over time, such as using a primer, right? A primer that may irritate the client's lashes and along their skin and then cause issues for them. And then each time they get that, it kind of gets a little bit more sensitive. Then an allergy actually initiates an immune response. So this is your cells looking at you and being like, what is this? Like, I'm afraid of this. And then over time, as you're exposed to these allergens, your body starts to fight that off even more. And as you fight that off even more, then those reactions that you have become so much more intense. And then that's how people end up with allergies because so many people, Mike, like, they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I've had lashes for 10 years and I've never had any allergies whatsoever. But it's consistent that consistent exposure to that
Yes.
allergen causes that.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you
Hi,
so much, because
Caitlin.
I think that's something that people really, really, need to kind of be a bit more informed of so they can understand. And then it takes a little bit of that fear out. When you hear someone had an allergic reaction, you're like, oh no, what's happening? But if you actually understand what's happening and that, hey, this is actually just able to pivot from there and understand your client a little bit better, then I think it really kind of helps everybody in the end avoid that issue.
It does. And like I think I was telling you one of the first times that we had chatted that I had a client before that was so adamant on having lash extensions that she had an allergic reaction and I was like, maybe it was the adhesive with carbon black. So I tried the sensitive adhesive, Invisibond, and there was no carbon black in it. She still came back with it. And then she's like, I'm just gonna pop some Benadryl. I'm like, okay. This is like 10 years ago, right? So then I continued to do her lashes for a little bit, and then each time it progressed, it got so much worse. And the last time I did her lashes, or the last time I was going to do her lashes, I was like, girl, I can't do this. But that's one thing like I teach my students is like if you feel that something is not safe to do, even though that client may want to do it, send them elsewhere. Advise them not
Yeah.
to go elsewhere, but you can't control them. But it does play a huge role on your reputation and that's something that I
Yes.
still live with. I'm like, why did I let her take Benadryl?
It's a learning experience, right? And that's partly why we're here too. That's a great experience to share with others who are learning and just starting out, because at some point someone's going to have that one client who
Oh,
you don't know how to tell them this just isn't for them and they
yeah.
probably shouldn't, but it's difficult, but that's a good experience to share with people, it
Yeah.
lets them know that they're not alone in that experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think like obviously the more experience you get with dealing with clients, it becomes a little bit easier. But at first when you start lashing and you're in your first year or second year, it's like, how do I tell this person?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and if you need any advice on that. I'm always here to help out because I love helping people get a little bit more confident in their practice and things like that. Okay, so moving on, Mike. We
Yeah.
are just past, where are we here? Number three, we did, nope.
So
We went through this. We're on topic three. We're falling a little bit behind, but that's okay.
yeah.
All right, so let's look at factors that affect cyanoacrylate adhesives. When we look at factors that affect CAs, we obviously know the two main components here, which is temperature and humidity. They play a significant role based on the adhesive that you're using, and every adhesive has a range, whether it's 40 to
Mhm.
60 or 20 to 70, etc. Um, I feel that, and this is something that isn't even there, but I know we talked about it. I feel a lot of the factors that affect CA adhesives is also the amount of adhesive that you're using. Because I think that as lash artists, almost a decade here in this industry, that at one point we were told we were using too much adhesive. So then we'd try to like get away from that and having no ball and just the minimum amount. And then all of a sudden retention is really, really poor. So it's like Goldilocks, right? Finding that happy medium there.
Mhm.
Um, and using humidifiers and dehumidifiers and the purpose of those and how they interfere with our environment as well as pH. So if you want to kind of take that over and chat a little bit about that.
Yeah, as we talked about, right? So temperature, pH, humidity, all of these things are going to have a defined effect on your adhesive, right? And all adhesives are formulated in such a manner that everybody will see, hey, apply in this temperature range at this RH, right? And you expect this amount of dry time. The other thing that, Dee did a great job of mentioning too is the amount of adhesive that you use, right? So we touched on temperature. Too high of temperature, it's going to accelerate your process. Too cold of temperature, it's actually going to slow down that curing
Okay.
process. And really, I
So
want you to,
hold up for 1 second, Mr. Mike.
yeah,
When we're talking about accelerating and slowing down, so let's just take that back down a bit.
yeah,
So I think what you're saying there is when you dip the adhesive into or when you dip the synthetic lash into an adhesive and you lift it back out, if that environment is too humid, what's happening? It's beginning to cure right away before you even get it to that lash, right?
yeah. So as soon as that adhesive is exposed to moisture, that cure is already beginning. The clock
Right.
is ticking in a sense.
Exactly. And that's why I know I talked to you about like trying to become more efficient with like left-handed, right-handed, and things like that,
Yeah,
and like trying to find that happy medium. So that's one side of it. The humidity is too high. Moisture content is causing that to completely cure before it even gets to the lash. So it might look like it's having that great connection, but then what happens? Slip off a few days later, right? Because it wasn't applied properly.
yeah.
And then on the flip side of that, if there's no moisture content, what I find is I'll place the lash on the natural lash and there's just these like little balls forming. Nothing is happening, right? There's like not enough moisture there to actually grab onto it. So they're all like, oh, surface tension, surface energy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, having a good amount on there is huge. You want to make sure that you're getting the most surface area to increase, that adhesion. The more surface area you have, the better adherence you have between your natural lash and lash extension, and the more that bond's going to be able to handle like more strength, more mechanical stress, and just be a little bit more durable for you, right? So
Yeah.
making sure that you're using the right amount, but again, not too much, not too little, because if you use too much adhesive actually and make it too thick, you can actually see retention issues that way, and that kind of goes into the mechanics of how the adhesive works. But save that for a later day. Keep us on task. Um,
You're looking
but
at me, you're like, she's about to get into the mechanics.
no, yeah. So making sure that you have the best mechanical fit and you have as much contact and surface area
Yep.
between the lash and lash extensions important, and then
And with
temperature.
contact, you also mean like, so when you're putting that, if you have a flat lash and you have your natural lash, that natural lash is round, you have a flat lash here like this, you want to make sure there's no space in between there, right? So you want to make sure you apply that with enough pressure to push down, because
Yeah,
if you don't, then what's going to happen is that's going to come off, as well as having that little ball, right? Like I always say to my students, having that ball on the end is really important because the first place that synthetic lash is going to start to degrade is going to be right here at the tip where it's starting to lift up. So if you have that ball of adhesive there, that's going to allow for better retention. So that's like a huge, huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree. And a lot of this too, right? I always find myself going back to mechanical fit and application probably being the biggest factor that affects your retention and your CA adhesive.
Yep.
Um, you could have the best glues in the world, the best tweezers, like the perfect pH, the perfect
Perfect hydro
humidity,
front.
everything. But if that application process isn't good, it's one
Yep.
of those things that I know is hard for people sometimes objectively to swallow and be like, oh crap, maybe it's me. But it's something that, if you're willing to get better and kind of take that subjective look at yourself and be like, all right, maybe it's something I'm doing.
Yeah.
Maybe let's take a look at this. You can always improve and
Mhm.
add nicer tools to your process to make it easier. But again, that application process, mechanical fit, the amount of the adhesive used, all going into application technique really, really
Yeah.
play such a profound effect. I think more than people realize in even talking with like pH, humidity, and temperature. Out of those, I would say that application and mechanical fit is going to be your number
Yep.
one
I
factor that
agree.
affects your adhesives.
Agree. I feel like we focus so much on that pH, humidity, temperature, all of that stuff, but when it comes down to it, it's the amount of adhesive you're using, that application of how you're making that actually bond properly physically, not chemically as such. But I think that there's just like a lot of scare, a lot of fear there in that sense because we've been told, use a smaller amount of adhesive. And of course, it all depends on like what diameter you're using,
Yeah,
etc. But
yeah, and the style that you're applying and everything. But there is, again, the right amount to do. It's just for everybody, it's going to be slightly different because of your technique, because of the tools and the style that you lash, right?
yeah,
Everybody's going to kind of have their own little sweet spot.
yeah, 100%. And just touching on that too, I think in terms of using the the way that you apply your lashes and how you do them yourself is very, very different. Whether you apply a synthetic lash on top or on bottom or the side, it's irrelevant as long as you basically have that base to base connection and there's something secure there. Because I know that a lot of times when I teach newbies, they're like, oh, I didn't realize you can place a lash on the bottom of it. I'm like, as long as it's secure and you've got that ball there to keep it there, then you're good.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely less common than what I've seen, but it doesn't mean you can't do it just because it's less common.
No, and you know what, Mike? You're going to see this a lot more because a new thing now within the lash industry, in terms of artistry and stuff, is like everybody wants to place the synthetic lash underneath because when you think about it, you're looking at somebody's eyes like front on like this.
Yeah,
So if I have lashes applied here, it's not going to be as dark as what it would be if it was applied underneath. So really focusing in on that like bottom layer and having that dark, dark line right there is something like the industry is like really, really focusing on now too.
yeah, that's exciting to see.
Yeah, it's all kinds of fun. Okay, so three, we're here. Now we're gonna go on to shaking adhesives. So you and I have both discussed this, and I was kind of like having this. I have a shaker over here somewhere, this little thing, and I'm sure so many lash artists use it, and I love it. Even though my husband was like, "What the hell is this?" What is this vibrating thing? But I do like it, but I also think that there is a risk if you use it too frequently or the amount of time that you're using it, that it could have that like centrifuge effect where the particles that are of higher density would come outwards and lower density inside. Um, so not that I'm against it, but I think that going forward for me, I'd like to use more of a vibration system just to settle those particles.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say like you want a shaking motion, as you mentioned, right? You don't want anything that's kind of more of a spinning force because, as I mentioned, once that bottle's open, right, you're getting dimers, oligomers, and all those different density type polymer chains. So
Yeah.
while they're minimal in some, you might actually be encouraging separation when you're spinning it just because the natural,
Yeah.
centrifugal force, the merry-go-round effect, as I like to
Yep.
call it. But if you use something, I don't want to say like a sonicator. I don't know if people are familiar with sonicators, but something more that's going to have like a vibrating shaking motion
Yeah.
as opposed to
Yeah.
like a swirling.
No, I think there's a few companies I've seen that have had that. It's just like a little tiny square. The adhesive sits on, shakes for a few minutes, and then it's good. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna look into that a little bit more and see what I can find there. But
yeah.
I
There's
think
a
that's a good point to bring
there's
up.
a company in Pittsburgh. They're called Eberbach, and all they do is make orbital shakers and mixers for chemical manufacturing industry. It's all they do.
Okay. That's that's the
Vortexers, all
name of it.
that stuff.
You'll send me the name of it after, will you? So I can
Yes.
check in with them.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Okay, so instantly exposed. So the purity of adhesives, you know far more about the medical grade adhesives, and I feel like so many lash artists and brands, really focus on, oh, we have medical grade adhesives, but what does that really mean, and how is that different from your ordinary Joe
Yeah.
adhesives?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I've spoke on before, and I feel like I didn't do as good of a job explaining it. So I'm happy I get the opportunity to kind of rehash it again, right? So medical grade adhesives mean that your ingredients that adhesive is formulated with follow USP, basically pharmacological standards for ingredients, right? And what that
Okay,
means is basically first and foremost, flat out, simplest. I'm not going to go into USP standards because they're a little complex. Your ingredients have to have a purity of 99.99%, or it is not considered medical grade.
right.
Plain, simple, that's it. So if your ethyl cyano acrylate that is in your adhesive, you ask your manufacturer, like, hey, can I get a purity test of that raw ingredient? And it comes back, it's 94% pure. And there's, 6% impurities in it, whatever those may be, unreacted monomers, does not matter. It is not considered medical grade. Medical grade cosmetics, I'd say for the most part, 99.99% do not exist. Um,
And
as much as people are probably like, what?
yeah, no, and truly though, like, besides saying it's medical grade, yes, there's purity to the cyanoacrylate, but also like there are other ingredients that we need in order for that to function properly. So,
So there's one brand I know for certain out on the market that does have a medical grade adhesive. They've done the clinical studies, and it just contains ethyl 2 cyanoacrylate. That being said, it is fairly costly because of the cost involved with that. But the other thing about making sure that something's medical grade is it has to be biocompatible, meaning it doesn't cause damage to your cells, it's not toxic, it won't cause irritation or any of those. So the one medical grade adhesive that does exist and is used in hospitals, doctors' offices, emergency rooms is known as Dermabond, and that is made of cyanoacrylate, where
and
it's
that's
not
at
ethyl.
99%.
Yeah, it's
So are there
99.99%.
stabilizers in that?
Nope. And if there is a stabilizer, that stabilizer itself has got to be biocompatible and considered non-toxic. So the what did I say? Dermabond. Dermabond itself is octyl
Octo
cyanoacrylate.
cyanide,
Now,
right?
octyl is not as durable and not nearly as strong, I'd say, when it comes to like pure tensile strength and shear force,
Yeah.
compared to ethyl cyanoacrylate, which is why ethyl is used.
Right.
However, octyl is used in lash adhesives, and
Yeah.
I have seen it in lash adhesives, and it's commonly blended with ethyl if you do see it in lash
And it's
adhesives.
also marketed as being more of a sensitive adhesive because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so a lot of where those sensitivities come from, if you get a sensitive adhesive, right, the more sensitive cyanoacrylates, why they're considered sensitive and more sensitive than, let's say, butyl or ethyl or methyl, which is toxic, right, is I keep saying all these different words in front of cyanoacrylate. It's basically talking about what's called the side chain, basically a group coming off of that molecule and how long that is. It's because
Right.
they're separate and activated when cracked in the tube. Oh, there you go. All right, perfect. Yeah. So I personally, I've had Dermabond before when I split my chin open when I was younger. So it does work, and it still does have a
So is
warming
it
effect.
instant? Is it instant? Like immediate
Yeah, so if it's cracked in the tube, that would lead me to believe that it is basically, as we talked before, right? When it's sealed,
exposed?
it is not exposed to any moisture. It's probably
Right.
induction sealed under inert conditions with argon or nitrogen. And as soon as you crack that, that's the instant exposure, and that's why it instantly
Right.
polymerizes. So they're probably single-use individual tubes, if I had to
So I'm
guess.
just thinking if we were to use like Dermabond for lash extensions, I think that it would just probably cure too quickly for us to even be able to make that
Yeah.
work, right?
Yes, and that's part of the thing, right? So if you ever work with, I know the one thing that I heard people say with that medical grade adhesive that does exist is you really have to work quick because it cures a lot faster than most adhesives. And a lot of people tend to not like that because they still need some sort of leniency when they are going through the lashing
Yeah.
process.
We're not like complete superheroes, even though we think we are. Um,
Yeah.
shampoo and what to do. Okay, so I think that that one's coming up very soon about
Lash
lash shampoos. Okay,
shampoos, yep, we'll be talking about
um,
that. But yeah,
me and
just to
you, we're so bad for time, Mike. We're
I
brutal.
know, I know, I know. The only thing I want to get in there is basically how can you know the purity of your
Yep,
adhesives, right? And
right.
it basically comes down to a lot of people are like, well, I have the SDS. Think of your SDS basically, it's just your ingredients list, and it's telling you all the safety precautions. If there's a spill, if there's a hazard, what are the health precautions? All of those things to do. That's really what your safety data sheet is doing. And
Yeah.
technically, on safety data sheets, if something is considered a trademark, they actually don't have to list the ingredients. They just have to
Is
include the specific
is it
precautions
under a
of
certain
handling and
percentage,
storage.
or is it like they don't have to,
No,
if it's trademark, they don't have to list any
if
ingredients?
it's trade secret, they don't have to disclose anything whatsoever. They
Really?
can put trade secrets on there as long as the information on that SDS
Yeah.
correlates to safe handling and precautionary measures and disposal measures of that formulation. They don't have to disclose it.
So
Now, what you can do.
reviews this? Who is reviewing this? You're talking about like Health Canada, the FDA reviewing this, so they don't have to
Oh,
disclose it
you
to
can
people.
apply for trade secrets.
Uh,
It's a process that you actually go through. It's kind of costly, to be honest, but it's well worth it if you actually have something innovative and you actually want to keep your IP.
so
So it's not anything I would talk anybody out of, honestly.
So just with a safety data sheet, so if I import adhesive shampoo, if I import any products from overseas or here in Canada, if I have it shipped to me, I generally ask for a safety data sheet before I even decide to go with anybody. And I also have some input as to what ingredients are going into it, but just for people that are interested in importing their own products or starting up their own brand, I think that that's really important for you to cover. So having a safety data sheet will show you what ingredients are in it, the precautions. There's like a number of sections that you go through. So if this were to happen or that were to happen, what you would do, and that's part of your due diligence, right? Like you
Yes.
have to have that as a brand owner. So if you don't have the safety data sheets, you can be held liable for that. So definitely keep that in mind. And the COAs is something new that you and I have talked about that you kind of, you've brought to my attention, which I'm
Yeah,
grateful
and
for.
I'm not gonna lie, I was a little surprised when everybody who I would bring this up to is like, what the heck is a C of
Yeah,
A? So a C of A is just a certificate of analysis, right? So there's a couple different things, C of A's. You could get a C of A that tells you this is the viscosity, the pH, the color, the smell of this specific batch of material. Other C of A's, right, could be for an analysis or raw ingredient analysis.
yeah,
So what is common in manufacturing industries, I have a background also in cannabis industry as well. So something that's really big and important for us when we do extract any materials to make concentrates, right,
yeah,
is making
yeah.
sure that we understand what raw material we're putting in there, right? Was it sprayed with any oil such as wintergreen oil or neem oil? What type of contaminants are we working with? And all those different things, right? Because that what is in that starting material is going to end up in your final product unless you remediate it or refine it from that ingredient somewhere in your process.
Yeah.
So your C of A's basically is going to tell you the composition of your ingredients that you're starting with and any potential contaminants. As you mentioned, right, having SDSs in Canada is huge, especially after going through the cosmetic notification process and other
Yep.
things. You are pretty much required to have that as a show of doing your due diligence and making
Sorry,
sure
we're trying
that
to plug it
you're
in
not
with.
you're good and that you're not, ordering anything that could be damaging or harmful to people. Your C of A's are really no different than that. And in Canada, especially, there's other ingredients too, like glycerin, right? Very,
Yeah,
very
we've.
common. Most people don't realize that in Canada, you need a certificate of analysis proving that the diethylene glycol concentration of your glycerin is below a certain amount. And if you do not have that, you are liable to, some sort of regulatory action. The extent
Yeah.
of that, I can't really speak on. It's kind of case by case. But there is, a reason that these C of A's exist and why they're necessary. They tell you a lot about the purity of your ingredients, where I think a lot of people are looking for the SDS sheet for that, and that's not really the proper place to look. It just tells you how much of that ingredient is in that formula, not
Right.
how pure it is.
No, and Mike, you know what? After like the first time we talked about the COA, I actually looked at it. I order some of my products, like my raw products from like Making Cosmetics, or
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
if it could be.
I'm familiar with them.
So
Special Chem, Making
whenever,
Cosmetics. Yeah.
yeah. So whenever I order from them, I do get the SDS and I do get the COA, but even me being a cosmetic scientist in this, I really never looked at this COA before. So
Oh, yeah.
I've got it back here and I'm going to go through it and look at it. But I feel like there are certain websites that you can order this raw ingredients from and that you know that they're like adhering to those standards. But I think that still you always want to check it. So I'm just going to be a little bit more diligent myself in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something, if anybody needs help or, hey, I don't really understand what I'm asking for, even though I just listened to you, please, again, feel free to reach out, contact me, schedule a call, DM me,
Yeah.
whatever you need to do, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm more than happy to help whoever, no matter if, you're just starting out or you're a massive
Yep.
brand and you're like, oh, I can't believe we haven't been doing this. I've heard it all. I've seen it all. So don't feel bad.
Okay, so topic number 5, and I know we still have that question about lash shampoo and
Yes.
what should be the composition. That's
We're gonna
coming
get
up
to it, I
next.
promise.
It's number 6, I promise. And this is one of my favorite topics too, girls. So I got you. So the LED UV adhesives. Ah, ching, 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 ching. The biggest topic right now. I feel like so many people are so confused whether they should or shouldn't. And at first glance at it, it's like, oh God, like how can that be safe for your eyes, being that your skin here is so thin and your eyes are so susceptible to damage, you know? So I understand where people are coming from, but I think from when it first came out to where we are now in the industry, there's a lot of changes. And I know that you have spoken with some different people that have more expertise in this area. So maybe you can go ahead and give us all the fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did record a podcast. I was on the Lashcast panel discussing UV adhesives. They have a couple great people. If you're curious about learning more after we talk about what we talk about, I highly encourage you guys to listen to that because they have great contacts on there. They have the CEO of a company who actually patented the device and the system itself, and then they also have a physicist who has I want to say he has a doctorate and his PhD in photonics, which is the study of light. So he's even more well versed than I am in this stuff,
Right.
and he was just such
So
a pleasure to listen
back
to.
it up to when you say it was patented. So what does that mean for the audience?
Yeah, so this technology is patented already by a company in the lash extension industry, and this is their technology. So right now, currently, there is a lot of knockoffs and ripoffs of these systems that do come from overseas. So you want to make sure that you're really looking for, a good system. That's had its safety testing. They have some sort of training required, to purchase this system. The adhesive is compatible with the light, and they've done their homework to make sure the science works between it. And then also I know that some of these companies who have jumped on these systems and done their due diligence, they actually do have a preventative maintenance system. That was
Which
one of my first
is
questions was,
huge, right? Because
yeah,
how do
because
you know if it's still working the same way or if it's going to cause
yeah,
damage?
And I mean, it's a light, right? So lights naturally dim over time. It's gonna happen, especially even if it's a diode, right? It just is a natural
Yeah.
process of lights and lumens and intensity and all that stuff. So I'm happy to know that there is companies out there who have taken the time to put the money, the investment, the science behind these systems and made sure that they work and they are safe. So I'm more happy to talk about them now while, there's more information about them. And I think the coolest thing that people don't realize is they're still cyanoacrylate adhesives. They just have a different initiator
Yeah.
where instead of water being the main driving force, where water still does cause polymerization of these adhesives, the main thing driving this polymerization is actually what's called a photo initiator. And really, what those photo initiators means, it just means it's initiated by a certain wavelength of light.
Right, exactly. So I think that the system itself, we can back it up to what it is. So you have your adhesive, everything is applied the same way. Then you have this light that comes on. I think it's every single time you apply a lash, I think maybe hit your foot against it, the light
Bing.
comes down. So
Yep.
as we know with like nails in general, right? Like those ones, they cure so much and they last so much longer under that light. But it's all about the wavelengths that make it safe or make it unsafe. And this is why you talk about the preventative maintenance, because at what point, if we have a safe range that we're working at, is that going to exceed or, decrease in that? So I think that's really important to bring that up. And from my experience as a brand owner as well, I mean, there's so many different like wholesale sites. Like you've got Alibaba, AliExpress,
DH
DHgate. There's so
gate.
many,
Yep.
yeah, so many places for you to go to and just be like, oh, I'm gonna go buy this UV light. But I think that's a huge risk. And being just selling products myself and stuff, even with my education in chemistry, I still would not feel comfortable providing that service with that UV LED light without having the proper training. Because also, one, insurance, right? Like, what is your insurance going to cover you if something were to happen? And with any new technology, it's
Yeah.
something that hasn't been explored. And even though I feel the information we have at this point is showing us that it's pretty safe if used properly. The thing with studies and new innovations is a lot of times it's 10 years down the road that you see any negative effects. So I think that if you are interested in using that UV LED light system, that you should receive the proper training and make sure you really understand how to take care of that system itself. And yeah, that's basically my advice there.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I did want to add too, because UV exposure, everything, like especially going back to my mom being an esthetician, right? Sun is bad. Sun equals age. Sun equals wrinkles. Stay away from UV. Um, Dr. Warren Stout on
Are
that
you wearing your
podcast series.
sunscreen?
Am I wearing sunscreen?
Yes.
Yeah, I wear sunscreen all the time, but you don't need to with these systems. I promise you that. So what's cool about these systems is I think it was Dr. Warren Stout on that panel of podcasts that I was a part of, kind of talked about the intensity of the exposure and kind of correlated it to basically it's it's so minimal that it's not even like you walking outside in the sun for 2 seconds and then walking back in your house. It's even less significant
Yep.
than that in the amount that you're receiving in the intensity of those packets of light.
Yep.
So it is relatively safe when we're talking about like UV exposure. Is it going to promote melanoma or any of these things? The amount in which you're exposed to, basically, as described by Dr. Warren Stout and a couple of these other panelists, basically, it's very safe and a lot safer than we're led to believe. The most dangerous thing is what we talked about, right? Going off of Alibaba, DHgate, buying, a like a bootleg
Yep.
system
Yeah.
essentially to go try it out, right? Always, pay the cost up front and make sure, yes, distance plus wavelength plus time. Thank you.
Who
It's all the
is this
exposure.
girl? I like her.
Yes.
That's pretty good. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's
Distance,
awesome.
wavelength, and time.
Yeah, so
No,
really that's basically what, correlates to your exposure and how damaging this is. And when you kind of take those things into account, and
yeah,
especially the brands that have put the science into it, I'd say they're fairly safe systems. And the one other benefit that I don't think people are really looking at, right, is okay, now we have photo initiators. how can we utilize potentially these photo initiators or maybe other things in this process that respond to certain photons of light
Yeah.
that are safe, that'll improve my bond flexibility, improve its chemical
Yeah.
resistance, right? So now this is really opening the door for a lot of innovation in the industry, and that's really what excites me the
100%.
most.
100%. And like I've said to you before, I've had experiences previously where, I wasn't open to innovation, and the idea of pre-made fans and things like that just bothered me so much. But I think that it's really important as lash artists and being leaders in the industry to be open to things, even though it might scare you and make you feel uncomfortable. I mean, that's how the industry evolves, right? It's those things that you question. So I think it's good that lash artists are skeptical over it and they're
Yeah.
asking these questions because it allows us to have these conversations and figure out, hey, is it safe or not safe?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice too, from the chemist and the guy who's more on like the design side in the industry, right? I always encourage people to ask these questions because you might be asking a question that we may have thought of, but not to the extent or in the perspective
Yeah,
that, you're asking your question. And it kind of not only helps us reinforce our understanding of the system, but also ensures that we do our due diligence and we thought of every single possible, concern that people have.
100%. And I think like this is something like I'm so passionate about is just like bridging the gaps in between like different professions and industries and making sure, like talking to you, what can I understand from you that I haven't understood before? And like, what can you take from me that we can apply together and help the industry as a whole?
Yeah,
And I think that's going to be
absolutely.
something more that we see now and in the future as well. More collaborations, more trying to understand things, which is really exciting for us.
Yes, yeah, no, I see, and I love that. I completely agree. It's something I've never had the pleasure, obviously, of lashing, and honestly, my hands are so shaky that there's no way I could do it. So
Yeah, I'm gonna teach you.
you're not the first to tell me that, so we'll see how well it
Have
turns
you
out.
actually never tried though?
No, no, tweezers with those one little things. I'm so scared that I would poke someone in the eye or hurt someone. There's no way.
Okay, so don't touch a tweezer until I come to you,
Yeah,
okay?
sounds good to me.
I'll show you the right ways. Okay, so now we're going to go into products. So the topic number 6 is about primers, but let's kind of jump into the audience right now. And she had
Yes.
a question about shampoos. So, what are your thoughts on that question? Let me just go back to it. What was it? It was how to properly choose a lash shampoo and what should the composition be. So, I'm thinking a lash shampoo, and this does get really tricky because we have like the concentrate formulations, right? That
Mhm.
you make yourself. And then we have so many, and like there's so many different ingredients that can be in shampoos for surfactants. And we touched on this like with my formulation and
Yes.
surfactants themselves. If I can just explain this a little bit, what they do is they have like a hydrophobic and a hydrophilic part to them. So they love water and they also love oil.
Hmm.
And when they get together, they're able to take away dirt and oil, like the sebum from our skin. Um, but the issue is in high concentrations of this thing we call surfactants, that can create a micelle concentration, which means that these aggregates are formed and they can actually start to break down the adhesive. In regular shampoos that are formulated properly, that's not an issue. It's not anything for you to worry about. But I do think that there are like there's no I don't know if you have advice on the shampoo, but I think there's so many different ingredients and most brands that I know are, sourcing it from overseas or whatnot. So I can't really say that they're adhering to any type of standard here in Canada or the States. So what would be your suggestion in this manner?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you want to look for, I'd say, I hate using the word gentle because it's such like a subjective word, you know what I mean? But you want to use surfactants.
So
Another word for them is like just simple detergents, right? So you want to use like a more gentle detergent that's more suitable for the skin and a little bit more,
like
I hate even saying, but
anti-phthalic? Yeah.
yeah, like not something that's I don't want to say biocompatible, but less irritating to the skin. But not, I'm not saying like baby shampoo, right? There was a time and a point where everybody's like, just use baby shampoo. It's super gentle. Everybody should use that to cleanse the lashes. And really, that's not always the case because of the other components in there, the humectants, some of the emollients, right? So shampoos are pretty complex, but when looking for a shampoo, right? There's certain components, I would say like triglyceride contents that you may want to avoid just based on our talks previously about degradation of the polymer and how susceptible that ester backbone
Yeah.
is to chemical reactions. And really, that's like your bread and butter and
So
integrity of the polymer chain.
that
So
might
having,
be a bit too much for the audience.
yeah, but
So
yeah, so
in
like I'd
terms of
say,
the shampoo itself, what is the best response that we can give for that one? I would say number one, if you're purchasing from a supplier, I think that they should provide you with that SDS because that shows that they're being diligent in what they're doing and they know the ingredients they have, and then they have that INCI number. But no one's really going to look at that. So less
no, I would say,
ingredients, the better. I also believe that the less ingredients, I find that a lot of companies try to add more and more to confuse things. But you can also send the ingredient list over to myself or Mike, and I'm sure you're happy to go through it. Like I am happy to go through it and just be like, okay, yeah, this is a safe option for you.
yeah, absolutely. I'd say, like, for me, there's a couple key ingredients that you want to avoid when it comes to lash shampoos, triglycerides being one, but specific types, and I can always help identify those for you. And then the other thing being, as we mentioned, gentle surfactants. And again, I can kind of identify some of those for you. To put it in perspective, SLS, sodium lauryl sulfate, is, something that's more common. It's more abrasive and a little bit more drying to the
Oh, we've
skin.
had so many negative
Yeah,
talks
so
about that.
SLS, because of its molecular composition, can kind of have more of an effect than other surfactants do. But again, it kind of comes down to, as Dee said, composition of the formula, and then also, the molecular structure of some of these ingredients and how they work.
Yeah, and like the
Yeah, I love that you
frequency,
looked
right?
at
Like
them.
how much you're using it. I just want to add to this because I really, really, the last little while I've been like so conflicted with lash shampoo, and as I've gone through this eye health course that I've done, I've really come to realize like how important it is for you to have that natural sebum around your eyelids and not to have the possibility of contact dermatitis or blepharitis. So I know that we normally encourage people to wash their lashes every day or every second day. The way I look at it now is I encourage my clients to wash them when they wash their hair. It shouldn't be an everyday thing. I mean, it should be something that you do when you wash your hair so it's compatible. You don't want to strip the oils from your natural lashes. And you want to make sure that they're still sanitary, healthy, that you have serum on them, etc. But you also don't want to cause more damage. And I find that looking at different clients that I've had over the years, it's like if you're using it every day, their skin can become a little bit more flaky with that contact dermatitis or with blepharitis, just the flaking of the skin. And what happens then is our dear friends, Demodex, which everyone knows, those little creatures, they will find a place to live and stay and have eggs there. And I've done 2 removals of Demodex, and it's not fun. So I'm always very conscientious over that on what I tell my clients. But I do feel that like every third day is good. Doing it every day is probably not the best thing for you.
Yeah, I would agree. Overwashing anything, and that kind of goes back into what we were talking about with sensitivities before, right?
Yeah.
You're altering the way that that skin barrier functions, and overwashing it and overexposing it without giving any nourishing components back, or some sort of like oils or moisturizers or emollients,
Yeah.
humectants to kind of take back what you've drawn out. I completely agree. That's definitely going to have an effect. Overwashing is definitely a thing.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And then also like moisturizing. So right now we're leading into our primers, one of my favorite topics. And you know that I have consulted with you a few times about my concept of rather than having an alcohol-based primer, because I find that alcohol-based primers, rather than actually hydrating the lashes, which is what cyanoacrylate adhesives love, it's just drying them out, making them more brittle. So how do we go from having alcohol-based primers to hydration primers? And I know that originally when I had formulated the first product, it was more based on glycerin, and I had asked you, you know, your opinion. And I know you love hyaluronic acid, sodium hyaluronate. So,
Yes.
and I know because that absorbs, it's able to take in 1,000 times that mass, right? 1,000 times that mass, yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yeah. It is able to hold so much water, like a
yeah. So
ridiculous amount.
and what we mean by this is like, okay, so I just want to kind of explain this quickly. It's like when you get your lashes wet, do you think that you're hydrating them? No, they're not. It's such a misconception. You're not actually hydrating your lashes. In fact, once you get them wet, you're actually making them more susceptible to dry out because of the atmosphere around
Hmm.
you. But when you use a humectant, so a humectant is something that draws in moisture and keeps the
Yes.
lashes hydrated. So my concept with this was to be able to have a product that not only allowed for the proper, or sorry, you'd have your alkaline, or not alkaline, your higher pH, um,
I
like
know what you
slightly
mean.
acidic pH shampoo with warm water to open it up, right? So that your cuticles were opened. And then you would have um, your hydro prime or hydration prime that would come in, and while those cuticles are left open, which is what we want for more surface area, what's going to happen then is that hydration primer is going to come in and keep that surface of all of this moisturized. Whereas if you had just water by itself and you laid it on
Mhm.
top, what's going to happen? It's going to dry up, right? So you're going through 2 hours of lashes, 2.5, maybe three, depending on what you're doing. And as you go through, you'll notice that it's not going to adhere as well, right? So that was my kind of concept. And we discussed like glycerin and how maybe hyaluronic acid might have been a better alternative. Do you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So the only reason, everybody, glycerin is another one I hear besides oils and adhesives that everybody's like, don't use that, avoid it at all costs. It's going to destroy your adhesive. And again, I like to remind people that yes, certain things because of their, chemical structure or some other factors that involve that, right, may have a more profound effect on the adhesive and its durability.
Yeah.
But that being said, right, if products contain, if they're, let's say, 100% glycerin, yes, that's going to be a much more profound effect than, oh, my face moisturizer has it, but it's all the way at the bottom, so it's only probably a couple percent, right?
Yeah, like
So
one,
those
two
are going to have,
percent.
yeah, and that's going to have a big effect. But glycerin, right, just like as we mentioned, is also susceptible to attacking that, backbone essentially right in the middle of your
Yeah.
bond and degrading it a little bit. So something like sodium hyaluronate with its different structure, but its ability to have like similar like properties and characteristics that behave
And
to glycerin,
And I
it worked
agree,
very
it's
well.
truly a better alternative for it. I'm in the process of it now. I've got my like cosmetic fridge, so I keep all the ingredients in there. So my daughter comes out in the morning and she's like, "What are you doing, mommy?" Just trying to experiment here. But I would agree. The only thing that the what is the pH of hyaluronic acid? I'm thinking some must around be around like 3 or 4. Is it?
Um, honestly, I'd have to
Look
look and confirm. But the thing to keep in mind too is if this is in a system, a lot of these, formulations, you'll see pH balance or formulated for skin compatibility, right? So even though it's a more acidic ingredient, the formulation itself will not be as acidic as the ingredient, right? They'll commonly add things to make it more suitable for skin.
right.
And
But like
um,
for me in purchasing like raw ingredients, I'm just thinking, but I could always have a pH balancer in there as well.
yes, citric acid and sodium hydroxide. Those are the two.
Yeah.
That's the only two you need for the most part.
Got those in my fridge. Um, but yeah, no, I think that's great. So for Lash Fest, I'm hoping to have the hydration prime ready to go. So I'm excited about that and making some changes based on our conversations. And obviously, as you learn, education is so important for everybody, regardless of what industry you're in. So let's talk about the isotonic.
Yes. Yeah. So isotonic saline. I love this stuff. It's What I like most about it, honestly, is it's something that's relatively inexpensive for lash artists to buy. So if you're not looking to really expand that, catalog of products you use to master your retention for lash extensions, this is kind of a nice, cheaper alternative. So just high level, right? What is isotonic saline? I know this is something that's been thrown around a little bit in the lash industry. Isotonic saline, if you think of saline solution that goes through your IV drip, that is isotonic saline right there. So basically, what that means is it has similar osmolality to that of your bodily fluids. And everybody's probably like, what the
So
heck
there's
is
no like
osmolality?
extra charges. It's keeping things like completely consistent throughout,
Yeah.
right? So
So to give you,
there's no bodily changes going on.
yeah. So basically, your plasma osmolality, it's a measure of your water electrolyte balance in your body. And sodium, right? Sodium chloride is an electrolyte that we use. So it basically has a similar electrolyte concentration to that of water. So it's not going to change the cell size when it's affecting it. It's super biocompatible. It's almost kind of nourishing to the area that it's applied because of its similarity to that of like our bodily fluids. And then the other thing that I think is really neat is because it's so similar to our bodily fluids, right? We mentioned just putting plain old water on your lashes. It's actually going to, dry you out more than
Yeah.
you think by applying water. But when you use this isotonic saline solution, it doesn't have enough of a pressure differential to actually draw water out of your skin or your hair
Right.
follicles. And as Deidre said, it keeps hydration, right?
Yeah.
So if you're currently already, sorry, my phone's fumbling. I'm on the, I have it on the charger. But if you're currently, hydrated in your lash line and all of those things, right? It really helps maintain that level of hydration that you already come in for with your lash appointment. And if it's something where, you're a little bit more on the dehydrated side or that skin barrier is compromised
It's a
at the
yeah,
application site,
good
yeah, it
good
has like a
alternative.
nourishing effect, and it's
Yeah.
almost exactly it mitigates any potential that okay, we might have doesn't bring hydration to the body, right? No, it does not bring hydration to the body necessarily, but it helps kind of equilibrate that, and it has a soothing effect because of it.
You mean applied like topically or like through intravenous?
Uh, if it's intravenous, it does hydrate the body.
No,
Topically,
I
it
just wasn't sure what she meant by that, so I just wanted to clarify.
yeah, no, that's a great clarification. Yeah, so intravenously, yes.
That's
Topically, it is if that area is compromised, right, it is going to have some sort of a hydrating effect, but not the significant hydrating effect
yeah.
to it being used like intravenously.
Yeah, so it does bring hydration to some extent, 100%. So I think when it comes to lash primers, we're like looking at like the fact that like you have alcohol based, you have hydration primers, and you have this isotonic solution. So how do you really, and I think this is going to be a huge thing now and in the future for lash artists, is actually taking primers and basing them like this client has lash lifts and tints regularly, and now she's getting lash extensions. So her lashes are far more porous. So what am I going to use on her versus what am I going to use on somebody that has never had lashes before? Because you do want to open up that cuticle. And even with that small little tiny drop of cyanoacrylate adhesive, you want to make sure the cuticle is open and that it's able to penetrate through properly. So I think that we're going to have a few different options for primers coming up, which will be really, really neat, but also, more educational. Should we guess what the other ways? No, just a little.
Just a
Yeah,
little, yes.
topically, I mean, just a little. If you want to look at hydration, you're looking at humectants, right? Like things that
Yes.
actually draw in the moisture. But I think what Mike is saying is the isotonic is a really good alternative just to keep things neutral.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions before we go on to number 7? There's only 2 more topics left.
Yeah, we're almost
We
at
left.
the end. Thank you guys too for all staying
We
with us. We appreciate it.
yeah. I know it's long. Okay, all right, I'm gonna move on to number 7. So oils and adhesives. This is a huge one because I know the lash artists here have definitely had clients who come in, maybe the first time, new clients, and they're like, God, I seen this lash artist and my lashes came off within 5 days. They were gone. They just completely fell off. And then you're like, okay, like what happened there? So, can oils really just have the lashes slip off? I would disagree with that. And like I say to my students, it all comes down to like 90% of the application, 90% of retention is up to you as a lash artist. Making sure that you have that surface area, that you have the right products, that you have the right mechanical pressure, that your client isn't talking and you're not trying to paint a moving canvas. Like there's certain things that really, really affect it, but 90% of it we can control as lash artists. The other 10% has to do with what they do. But even if your client takes like a vegetable oil, like we talked about, Mike, and like throws that in their eyes, all their lashes are not going to slip off. So in the event, as a lash artist, if you have that issue and your clients have lashes that slip off, that's generally because you never used a compatible adhesive or primer, or you were maybe really tired after a 12-hour day, you know? These things happen, but it's like important for you as a lash artist to be like, okay, I know like I maybe have done something wrong here, or I could have done something better, or etc. You don't necessarily have to say that, but I always recommend, even to the girls at the studio here, if you know they have a bad day, things happen. We're all human beings, just to fix the issue if it is something like that. But no, oils in general, they won't cause that unless you're completely saturating your lashes and really rubbing it there. So
Yeah.
you go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something I actually spoke about at LashCon 2023 too, in good bit, right? So a lot of that, as you mentioned, it has to do with the application and mechanical fit. So if the initial application was not that well, and let's say someone moisturizes their face with, raw, first cold pressed coconut oil, right? Coconut oil is one of those oils that I typically recommend people avoid from exposure along the lash line, as well as jojoba oil, just because it's so similar to that of sebum, and it's really, really good at seeping in,
Yeah.
especially into tiny cracks and crevasses like we see when
Because
our
the
adhesive
molecule is
cures.
so small.
Yeah, so it has to do with molecular size, and then what people don't really take into account, right? As I mentioned, triglycerides, your
Yeah.
oils, it's not just oil, it's like a complex mixture of, could be 10 to 20 ingredients.
Yeah.
If it's raw, unpressed, unrefined, could be up to a couple hundred, right? So there's
Yeah.
all sorts of different molecules in there. But really, what it comes down to is their composition and then the structure of some of those molecules. But what I was mentioning is, what oils work really well to do, and I think why people are scared of them, is they work really effectively as a slip agent, right? So if someone uses, let's say, a nighttime cream facial moisturizer that is high in coconut oil or high in a certain triglyceride concentration, okay, that slippage is going to already in that oil is already going to seep into some of those cracks and crevices, and then on top of that, naturally, as I mentioned, right, mechanical
Yeah.
irritation. It's hard not to touch your eyes, and especially if it's itchy, 90% of us, we're going to rub our eyes even if we have extensions or not. So a lot of it, as you mentioned, Deanna, is that mechanical agitation coupled with those oils. And then going back to how we talked about glycerin, right?
Yeah.
If your product, contains only 1 to 2% jojoba oil, it's probably not going to have that big of an effect. But if you are using raw jojoba oil, because it's less comedogenic and it's really
Yeah.
good and moisturizing for your skin, then yeah, it's going to have more of an effect than something that's been formulated in suspension in a product. So
Right.
really
And
keeping
just
that in mind too is important.
right. And just touching on that, because I don't think we've covered this, but I know it was something that I had said that I wanted to just remind people of, that just because an ingredient, you look at it and you're like, okay, like this ingredient shouldn't be used. Ingredients serve different purposes. So it depends on the function of them, whether they use as a humectant, a preservative, etc. And those all have a certain concentration that's involved in it. So
Hmm.
if you look at one ingredient and you think, oh God, this is going to cause issues, it may not, because the amount in that formulation is so small. So that does become a little bit tricky too.
Yes.
But we do have a question on how do we make primer and glue compatible? So I think that's an interesting question. And I really, really do think that over the next, few years, that we're going to see more customized products. Like I said, whether you're over the age of 60 or you have contact dermatitis or you have really porous lashes, there's just so many things to take into consideration. I do think that we're going to have specific primers for that clientele. But in general, right now, I mean, as long as you're using a primer that doesn't dehydrate the lashes and cause them to become brittle, and that's not saying like the adhesive will still connect with it and bond to it. It's just that it won't last as long. So if you're looking at retention, I think it's important for you to make sure you always wash the lashes with warm water using
Thank
a
you.
shampoo and rinse, because the warm water opens up those
Oh,
follicles, which we need,
yeah.
right? And then depending on your client's lash health, if they're very, very porous, they may need some kind of a hydration system. So by using a hydration system like we talked about with like sodium hyaluronate and water and various other ingredients that help that, that would be really beneficial. Or if it's somebody who's brand new and they've never had any lash treatments before, then they may use something different from that. So I really think it's very subjective, and we'll probably go more into that. But for you right now, I would totally recommend just making sure that you wash your client's lashes with that warm water using a shampoo, slightly higher in pH, still probably around a 6 point. You're laughing at me.
I got you.
Probably
You're
around
good.
like 6.5. If you use baby shampoo, and this is something I've always been against, baby shampoo has a pH of 7, which is neutral, and our skin's pH is lower than that. So if you're constantly using baby shampoo around your eyes, you're going to end up causing your eyes to become irritated, the
Hmm.
skin, not necessarily the lashes, and that can end up causing flaking and that condition called blepharitis. So I really feel that you should be avoiding that. But yeah, just going through that way and then making sure that the adhesive you use is a good quality adhesive. And you're buying from a legit brand and not just, Sky Glue on Amazon or something like that. I had to say Sky Glue. God.
Everybody knows Sky Glue.
I know. Who are these people? But yeah, that would be my answer to that one.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I completely agree. Hits the nail on the head. Something that's, not too drying, something that's going to open the follicle and all that
Yep.
stuff. And yeah, you already know. Never use baby shampoo.
Goddamn baby shampoo. Okay, so we're coming to our very last topic, Mike.
Yes.
This is on cosmetic regulations. I'm not sure how many people are from the States or how many people are from Canada. Wish I was in the States right now because out here there's snow on the ground in Canada. So I am kind of thinking about packing my suitcase back up. But we have Lash cosmetic regulations. So you're going to kind of just tell us a little bit about the product listings, facility registrations, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really high level things. I'll keep it high level just because I don't want to, put anybody to sleep here. But if anybody wants more insight on anything I go over, totally specialize in compliance in U.S. and Canada. So please, again, don't hesitate to give me a shout. But as far as regulations go, right, in the States, we have something pretty big happening that, hasn't happened since 1938, almost 100 years. We're getting a major overhaul on our cosmetic regulations and how cosmetics are distributed and manufactured in the US. So, if you don't know, what you want to look for is called the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulations Act. And everybody calls it MOCRA for short, MOCRA, MOCRA. But basically, it's going to aim to add an added level of transparency for consumers and manufacturers who distribute and sell cosmetics in the US. So, again, this hasn't happened since 1938. These are some of the most significant changes we have seen, and there's a couple key components of it, right? So, first and foremost, every every cosmetic manufacturer who does not meet small business exemptions is required to list their products, right, with the FDA. And what that means is you're going to be including your ingredient information, the facility at which it's registered or at which it's manufactured at also has to become FDA registered if it is not already. So you will have to provide some information about your product, the ingredients, where it was manufactured. Basically, this is also to add a level of safety. So say there was a contaminated cosmetic that came out, they're able to actually trace back the facility this cosmetic product came from. And then on top of that, they aren't able, or they're able to be like, okay, so there's other people that, produce cosmetics here. Let's shut the doors until it's assessed where the contamination is. So a lot of it's for public safety and then increased transparency on these cosmetics. Two other major parts of MOCRA that are
So
currently in effect
just
right now.
one sec, Mike. So I think for anybody that's listening, I'm not sure if you are currently looking at if you have a brand or you're starting a brand or anything like that, but these are very important points that Mike's pointing out because it holds us liable as brand owners to make sure that we adhere to these new regulations. And if we don't, then we can be held liable for that. So it's definitely a really good point that you're bringing this up right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me dial it back before I go into the two that are currently being enforced right now. So, product listing and facility registration, right? Both of those are required by July 1st, 2024. And who's required to do that? If you manufacture cosmetics that are sold in the US, you are required to do it. If you are a brand whose name appears on the label and it says distributed by Elusive Beauty brand, you are responsible for
This is for
registering that,
Canada as
listing
well, is
that
it, Mike?
product. So if say, do you sell products in the States?
We do.
Then yes, you have to do it.
But is it like for Canada? No, it's just if I sell products to the States.
Yeah, just if you sell products in the States, you have to register this stuff with the FDA, and you have until July 1st, 2024 to do so. So,
I
the
got your
one good
number.
thing, yeah, exactly. And the one good thing that I can tell people too is, right, so facility registration, it's completely free. Does not cost a penny. So if any of your partners you work with or manufacture your products for you, if they're not registered, it is a very simple process to get registered before I scare everybody, right?
Yeah.
It's a very simple process to get registered. And, if you fill out the registration form on a Monday, you're going to have that information back within 48 hours. So, really, it's
Okay.
free and it's easy for your manufacturers and vendors to complete. And I'm more than happy
Do
to
you
assist
think you could
anybody with that
email? Yeah, do you
process.
think you could email that over? Like send a link and like I could even put it on the website or anything for anybody because I'm interested in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
So,
I noticed one of the girls just said that she's looking to start her own brand, which is fantastic. This is actually like my third brand that I've started. So if you would like any help, the good and the bad stuff, I am certainly here to help you. So just reach out and DM me and I'll give you any advice and point you in the right direction.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Deidre's one of my favorites. She always tunes into my lives. She's always there. One of my favorite supporters.
Is this the last fluential
Yes,
fluent?
yes. I'm sorry. I keep realizing
Okay.
I'm saying her name and it's
I'm
not
like,
in
who
her
is this?
handle.
Love it. But that's like the
But
thing
yeah,
that like I love. Like I absolutely enjoy having
of course.
conversations with lash artists and people that, care about education and want to learn. It's incredible, right? That's
Yeah.
what's we're gonna help grow this industry, girl.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, so going back to that cosmetic,
Michael, what about me? What about me?
But yeah, so going back to the regulations, right? Product listing, the same thing. The process, it's free to list your own products. And something that I personally have been trying to do with people who reach out to me to this,
Yeah,
I don't want your money. I don't want to be your listing guy forever. If you want me to be that guy, I'm more than happy to be that guy. But
yeah,
something I offer to, people who come to me with this is let me train you on this process. I can train you how to use this portal. I can
yeah,
train you how to get set up. I can create a couple of these systems for you, and then you're self-sufficient yourself and you know how to use it. Because,
yeah,
every brand, they're not just looking to, all right, I have 5 things, that's it, I'm done for life. Everybody's going to look to expand, change their product line,
yeah,
maybe condense it, relaunch it, repackage it in
yeah.
some sort of manner. So it's something you're going to have to do, and product listings have to be updated annually.
Right.
So you're not going to get away from doing this, and I like that
So
they've made it easy enough for me to be able to train people I work with on the process so they can do it themselves.
So is this like where you're headed with it? Like, do you want to start like working on different formulations with lash artists? Like, are you gonna like really like just zone into like one area? Are you still kind of just like picking away at a few things?
Oh, I'm everywhere. I'm everywhere. Everywhere you turn. I have my hands in product development projects right now. I have my
Thank
hand in
you.
compliance
I'll
and
follow you
labeling
back.
projects. What else? Honestly, I'm a liaison for a couple brands between their vendors and manufacturers.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty much, when it comes to business development, operations, anything that you need, even supply chain, MOQs, ordering.
Nice.
I have a very good hand and
Quite
pretty
the
tight
dealer
grip
there.
on a lot of that. Yeah, yeah, seriously.
I find like over the last 9 years of being in the industry, you go from like being like a brand owner to a trainer to being a lash artist. There's just so many different areas. And like at this point, like I knew 5 years ago where my interest was with real lash science, but for some reason I just couldn't let go of spray tan trading, brow lamination, all these other things. And now I'm kind of like, I get it. This is what I want to do. I want to collaborate with people that, share the same passion I do with lash science and really focus in on that.
Yep.
And I do feel from my experience, like once you really decide what it is you're going to just completely own and like focus in on and, learn everything about it, that obviously makes you an expert in that area. So um,
Yeah.
that's something I've come to terms with. Not that I'm letting go of any of the other stuff. It's like this is my baby. I really want to dial into this. So
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're all looking to make something out of this. Whether you're just a lash artist looking out who dreams of having their own salon one day, or you know what, you're just like me in my position and you're watching in this and you're like, wow, I'm really into R&D and a formulator, but I really want to, what my end game goal is,
yeah,
hopefully, if all goes well, I'll have a small lab of my own here and, in a couple of years, and I'm say 5 to 10 ideally is what I'm looking at, and just
taking
doing
on different
simple. Yeah, and
projects.
just
Like yeah,
doing simple consumer testing for cosmetic
yeah,
goods and other consumer products to say, hey, you know what? What's the composition of this ingredient? Can you do a raw
yeah.
material analysis? Hey, can you make sure that my preservative system is safe and effective? So
Yeah,
I
so
think
like
we
you'd
all
be more
have.
interested in like the safety aspect of it.
Yeah,
What about
yeah,
like for
exactly.
me, I'm like I really love like new research, new papers, and like, oh,
Yes.
okay, this ingredient just came to be like chebula, right? Like I've heard so much about chebula. I'm like looking at the benefits of it. I'm like, how can I incorporate that into a product? Like that's where my heart is. Like I could just spend all day looking at different journals.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of too like why I like quality and supply chain and compliance so much too, because a lot of those nuances start as just a basic root cause analysis from something that you identify in third party testing. And you're like, whoa, this is
Yeah.
different. I've done this a bunch of times and now I have this.
Yeah.
What's up with this? So it leads you down that R&D rabbit hole, right? They're still so closely connected together. And I think that's what I really like about them. But really, I just, want to focus in on not only the science and making the things, but making sure we can
Give it stuff.
compliantly do such
Yeah.
and also understand how to market them correctly on top of that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that about you because I think as like an entrepreneur, it's so hard to like it's so easy, sorry, to lose sight of that compliance aspect of it. So for you to have
Yes.
like that passion and drive for it, like really makes things a lot easier. Okay, so where were we? We're with eight, the Canadian cosmetic regulations, the hot list. Is there anything you want to go over in terms of the regulations that we haven't discussed so far?
Yeah. So just real quick, I'll button it up really quick for us and then we can kind of wrap it up here, take
I
questions, and
told
then
you it would
anybody
be
can
two
reach out.
hours. 2 hours.
Yeah, I know. But the other things that are going on with Mocha right now, there's adverse event reporting that's required. So even mild reactions, if someone has a reaction, you should be documenting these processes. There is a specific form that people can fill out if someone has a serious reaction during lashing where medical intervention is required, such as like going to the hospital to get a cortisone cream or anything like
Yeah.
that. If any clients are reporting those issues to you, certain issues that require medical intervention, from making sure that they don't get worse and require preventative action, are required to be reported. So that's something people should be doing. And if you don't have a system in place or just a basic email essentially to keep count of any of those adverse events, it's something I can help you out with. I'm sure it's something Deanna can totally help you out with. So don't hesitate to reach out. And then the other major thing that is the responsibility of brands right now is safety substantiation. and that is making sure that you have done your due diligence to ensure that your product is safe as directed for use, and it is not capable of causing like any sort of harm. So I know a lot of people are like, "Oh no, how do I do that?" You can use existing data from the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel, ToxNet, PubMed, and other sources to validate the safety of your ingredients, and also if a product is similar, right? But let's say you guys just use sodium hydroxide instead of a different type of hydroxide as a pH adjuster, right? You can use studies on a similar composition product to validate the safety of your product. However, if there is gaps in safety data testing, such as toxicology data for an ingredient, that is the responsibility of the manufacturer and the brand who distributes it to fill in those gaps with scientifically sound methods, right? So some sort of
So
third-party testing.
I think what Mike is saying in more of layman's terms is that as a brand manager, brand owner, you have a legal responsibility to make sure that the ingredients and products that you have out there are safe for the consumers. So this adverse effect reporting, I had this thing set up there a few years ago where it was an adverse immune response report. So anytime I had a new adhesive or a new primer, I would have the girls from the studio write down what their client had and if there was an allergic reaction from it, or if there was, which is very uncommon, or some sensitivity or irritation. And then I would look at the ingredients in it and kind of match it up. Um, but even if you're not a brand distributor, it's also really good for you just to keep track of it, because in the event that company X ends up having issues with their primer, you have that documentation for who you applied that primer to, which would really be beneficial. So I think it's all about due diligence and just making sure you cover your butt. I know nobody likes paperwork, so we can certainly make that easy because we have digital options now. And even, Mike, maybe you and I'll send you over my rough copy that I have of the adverse immune response reports. And
Good
maybe
night.
between you what?
No, 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 no. Chat.
Oh,
You're good. Keep going.
but maybe we'll just kind of go through it together and see if we can get something in stone. And then that way I can put it up on the website, just have like a digital copy for free so
Yeah.
people can download it if they want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm more than okay with that. Something I'm very familiar with is SOP creation. I write a lot of SOPs for every single process
Standard
because it's just
operating procedures, people.
yeah, it's just the easiest way for me to track things. And if you
Yep.
have those in writing too, it just is another way to show that you've done your due diligence.
100%. Yeah. And systems, just systems are everything. We could have like a whole other conversation on systems because that
Yeah.
changes the game. Okay. So anything else you want to cover on there? I think we've had like a really good audience and lots of
Let's
lovely
let these people go to
questions.
bed.
I know. I need to go have my glass of wine and eat my fishy chips. Oh, no, it was so much fun though. Do you guys have any questions at all? Would you like to have like another live with us and have like a different topic? Because I know we really enjoy this, and like if we can provide you guys with education and insight and give you food for thought, that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And, anything that we talked about that you're like, yeah, we'd love to see more on this, maybe do a hyper focused,
Yeah.
talk on this subject, please, pitch it to us. And again, I know we've said it, I know I've said it the whole time too. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. All it takes is just a DM, a text, an email, whatever the case may be. I
Yeah.
have my Instagram handle, Michael B. Chemist. I have a stand store where you can book time for me. Deanna's on Instagram too, Elusive Beauty Brand. You can always reach out to her. Please, please feel free to contact us. Do not hesitate.
We really feel like this is the year for growth for the industry. And the only way that's going to happen is if we all collaborate together on this and learn from one another, because we all have valuable information to share.
Yeah,
So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come in here on this. And I never told anybody this, so I'm actually going to share the IG Live. So if you want to go back through this, if you want to go back through it and get some information, ask questions, reach out, then at least you'll have that there. So thank you guys so much for joining. And thank you, Mike. It's always a pleasure.
always a pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to next time.
Absolutely. See you later.
Take care.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.